Chapter 231. In Castellan, after the army stayed for one night, the Devers hurried over to join the soldiers. The next morning, the whole army was dressed in new clothes. The soldiers looked imposing as they marched forward according to the predetermined order of entering the city. After crossing the bridge, thousands of freedmen who had participated in the battle and the Greek mercenaries led by Xanthoparis also joined the parade. The Devers also changed to four-horse chariot. Capys, Drax, Hieronymus, and Lau's consul Avenogis also rode in two-horse chariots and followed closely behind. The army marched majestically towards the city of Thurii not far away. The freedmen and the families of some probationary citizens who had been waiting outside the city immediately burst into cheers when they saw the soldiers from afar. Arsines never dreamed that he would be the flag-bearer in a triumphant manner. At that time, all the legions had reported their candidates, and it was the Devers who named Arsines. He believed that in the battle that would determine the victory of the Second Crotone War, Arsines, as the captain of the legion, led a team of recruits and fought on the front line. In the face of the enemy's fierce offensive, not only did he take the lead, but he also commanded the recruits well and responded calmly. And in the case of more than half of the team's casualties, he still did not lose his fighting spirit and fought back bravely. He should be the representative of the whole army in this battle. When Arsines heard the Devers' praise for him, he, who already admired the Devers, was even more grateful to the consul. At this moment, he held up the flag that represented the commander of the whole army. Facing the cheers and the thousands of waving arms, he proudly puffed out his chest in the face of such a spectacular scene. Even Tormid, who had been through many hardships and battles for a long time, could not remain calm. He said excitedly to Xanthoparis, who was next to him, "After so many years, I have participated in so many battles, but this is the first time I have experienced the pride of being a soldier. The Devers are amazing." Xanthoparis stared straight ahead and said, "Don't look around, march properly, don't embarrass us mercenaries." Tormid hurriedly puffed out his chest and raised his head, but he joked, "You're even more serious than me, old man. Participating in the triumph parade is nothing. In the future, we will be like Hieronymus, sitting on the chariot and accepting the cheers of the people." Xanthoparis' old face was flushed with excitement. "That's right." Tormid's enthusiasm rose. "I heard from the Devers that because of this battle, the observation period of our Union citizens will be greatly shortened. After a few more battles like this, we will soon become official citizens of Dionia. At that time, Crigines. Hey, that's Crigines. Stop shouting. He can't hear you. He's an Alliance hero now." "Hero? With that thin body of his, I can knock him down with one hand. If it wasn't for the fact that his archery is better than mine, I would be the one receiving cheers from the troops now." "That's right, this guy blessed by the goddess of luck. Looks like we need to practice archery in our spare time. The next time the recruitment officer comes, we must be selected." "You're right." When the freedmen entered the sight of the people, they received even more enthusiastic cheers. After all, most of the people outside the city were freedmen. Seeing their former comrades become heroes of the Dionia Alliance, while they were envious, it also stimulated their desire to go into battle and kill the enemy. There were more than 20,000 soldiers participating in the Triumph Parade, forming a column that was 6 to 7 miles long. The freedmen at the back had just entered the welcoming area outside the city, and the military flag at the front had already passed the Triumph Arch inside the city. Soberkos looked up at the relief on the Triumph Arch and said to Leds emotionally, "Last time, I was a spectator watching the Triumph Parade, but now I've become a soldier participating in it." Leds laughed and said, "How do you feel?" "Very good. Very good. In the past, our cavalry was too weak to be of any use in battle. From now on we, the Dionia cavalrymen, will become the heroes of the Triumph Parade every time," Leds said with great ambition. His gaze was fixed on another tall flag beside the cavalry flag. Although he couldn't see the content of the flag from the back, he knew that it was written by the Devers, "Defeat the Croton cavalrymen and determine the victory of the battle." It was because of this achievement that the Devers placed their cavalrymen behind the flag-bearers of the army. As there were too many soldiers participating in the Triumph Parade, the Victory Plaza couldn't accommodate them all, and accidents could easily occur. Thus, the Triumph Parade this time had a rule. After the parade arrived at the plaza, they weren't allowed to stop. They had to circle around the plaza and leave the city through another street. On the west side of the plaza, on the platform in front of the Senate Hall, the senators solemnly looked at the soldiers passing through the plaza. Amicals, who was invited to the ceremony, saw the valiant and spirited troops marching past the platform in an orderly manner. He couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect that we would actually defeat the arrogant Crotone. This is a great victory. He was glad that he made the right choice before the war started. Castellan was firmly on Dioria's side. His words were approved by most of the senators, but Scombres expressed his disagreement. The Devers are the guarantee of victory. With him as the commander, I never doubted that the war would belong to our alliance. However, I think that we should have taken advantage of the moment when the Crotone was weak to completely crush them. His words were approved by a few tourist senators. Polixus even said, on this issue, the Devers did not consider the feelings of the tourists and let the Crotone off. This is really wrong. As soon as he finished speaking, Scombres glared at him fiercely. Lord Devers did the right thing, Cunegurata said with a straight face. To be able to lead the citizen soldiers to victory, he is a great general. To be able to use victory to gain enough benefits for the alliance is a true leader. If the war had continued, I'm afraid that Dionia would have suffered great losses. I'm very glad that Dionia has such a great governor like the Devers. Lord Cunegurata is right. Cornelis agreed. In this war, Lord Devers not only won a lot of fertile land for Dionia, but also allowed Dionia's influence to reach the southern end of Greece. Next, we'll have to invest a lot of time to discuss and solve how to manage and distribute these new lands. Tritodmos said with a smile. This is really a sweet but annoying thing. Everyone smiled knowingly. The senators of the Senate were noble and had a lot of work to do, but they didn't get paid. In order to increase their enthusiasm, and at the same time to win their favor, and to excite their interest in expansion, the Act of War proposed and passed by divers stipulated that, in addition to the allotment of land to the new citizens and the land awarded to the militia who had rendered meritorious service, every member of the Senate who had worked hard would also be awarded land, but the amount of land awarded could not exceed the average amount of land awarded to the soldiers who had taken part in the battle. Although the amount of land awarded was not too much, according to the current speed of Dionia's expansion, it would not be a small number. While the senators were happily talking about the newly obtained territory, Polixus' eyes flashed, as if he was thinking about something, while Amicals had a look of envy on his face. Look, our great hero is here. Plesinlas's shout drew everyone's attention back to the square. The Devers, dressed in military attire, appeared in the Victory Square on a war chariot. He smiled and waved to the people around him, pushing the triumphant celebration to its climax. The people shouted and jumped in excitement, waving their arms and shouting the Devers' name. They even ignored the guards by the side of the road and rushed into the parade in violation of the rules. They surrounded the Devers in the center and stretched out their arms, wanting to touch the protector of the Dionia, the Devers of Hades, who had saved Turin, defeated the strong enemy Crotone twice, and brought glory to the people of Dionia. The guards were highly nervous, afraid that something unexpected would happen. The Devers, on the other hand, was calm. He even got off the chariot and greeted the people gently, asking if they had suffered any losses in this war, if they needed help from the alliance, and so on. The people loved their governor even more. They surrounded the Devers and escorted him to the platform before reluctantly leaving. The senators stepped forward to welcome him. Cunigurata was the first to criticize. "Sir Devers, the situation just now was too dangerous. You should have stayed in the chariot and waited for the guards to escort you here." "What's so dangerous about it?" The Devers smiled and said, "The senators and the people are like a father and his child. As a father, he will naturally love his child, and the child will naturally love and respect his father. Why would he hurt his own family, right? Father and his child." The senators repeatedly thought about this sentence, and were more or less shocked. Later, this sentence spread and moved the people greatly. Therefore, the senators of the Senate also had another title, Father. Chapter 232. Metlos Phoenix believed that the Senate of Dionia was deliberately delaying time and fooling him. In fact, they had already prepared for the peace talks with Crotone. He had wasted all his efforts to rush to Thurii. The newly established alliance of Dionia actually dared to fool and despise Rockley. Therefore, he dragged his sickly body to participate in the triumphal ceremony. Because he was the messenger of Rockley, the Senate arranged for him to stay in a hotel not far from the Senate's hall. Since he lived in the city and was a VIP, he was naturally allowed to watch the triumphal ceremony. Originally, he wanted to take the opportunity to meet the consul of Dionia to vent his dissatisfaction. At the same time, he represented Rockley to express an appropriate threat to Dionia, which had just allied with Crotone, and force them to make some changes that were beneficial to Rockley. However, after watching the magnificent and lively triumphal ceremony that he had never seen before, he was shocked by the huge military strength, high morale, and the fanatical atmosphere of the people of Dionia. He realized that this was an alliance that worshipped heroes from the elders to the commoners. They were warlike and could not be ignored. He was afraid that they would not compromise easily, so he decided to retreat. After sending off the last contingent of freedmen, the people poured into the square. The speech of the Devers drew a perfect end to the triumphal ceremony. "People of the Dionia Alliance, I thank you on behalf of the Senate. When the enemy invaded, you were not afraid, you did not retreat, but worked together and fought bravely. The soldiers fought bravely at the front, not afraid of sacrifice, and fought to be heroes, while you worked tirelessly to transport supplies and evade the enemy's ambush. You endured the pain of losing your loved ones and supported us in the battle. Today we won. This is the result of the joint efforts of all the citizens of the Dionia Alliance, prospective citizens, freedmen, and their families. We will use this victory to comfort the warriors who died on the battlefield, and hope that their souls can reach the Elysium of Hades smoothly. I, Consul Daves, will also use this victory to tell you that the days of the Dionia Alliance being bullied are over, and you will have a better tomorrow. Victory to the Dionia Alliance. Victory to the Dionia Alliance. Victory to the Senate of Dionia. Long live the Devers Consul. Victory to the Devers. At that moment the square was filled with cheers, and the whole city of Turin became a sea of joy. After the holy day of sacrifice for the Sparta king Archas, after a period of preparation, the Sparta Council of Elders finally decided to elect a new king of Sparta to prevent the throne from being vacant for too long, which would lead to political instability in the country. On this day, the 29 elders of the council hall in Sparta entered the hall early. There were also 2 candidates for the throne. They were the son of the former Sparta king Archas, Leotychides, and the brother of Archas, Agesilaus. The chairman in charge, Creostida, announced, "The Sacred King Selection Conference has begun. First, the candidates will state the reasons why they should be the king." The young and energetic Creostida stood up first and said loudly to his uncle, "Agesilaus, the ancient law clearly states, the first to inherit the throne should be the king's son, not his brother. If the king happens to have no children, then his brother may inherit the throne. If you don't want to embarrass yourself, leave as soon as possible." Agesilaus did not face his nephew, but the crowd. His attitude was respectful, and his tone was low, but it was certain, respected elders, the one to inherit the throne should be me, the only brother of Arches, Agesilaus. Leotychides jumped and roared, interrupting his uncle's words. Agesilaus, don't think that you can play dumb just because you're a cripple. Listen, the sacred Sparta law has already stipulated that as the only son of Arches, I should naturally become the king. Stop fooling around. Agesilaus turned his head and looked at the flustered Leotychides. A hint of contempt appeared on his face. That's right, that's what the law says, but the prerequisite is that you're indeed the son of Arches. But I've heard the person you call father say more than once, you're not his biological son. Nonsense. Since he was young, there had always been similar rumors that reached Leotychides' ears. It became a nightmare that troubled him, and it also became his reverse scale when he grew up. At this moment, his face instantly turned red. He jumped up from his seat, rushed over, and grabbed Agesilaus. He shouted angrily, "Damn cripple! Don't think that I won't beat you up just because you're my uncle." He tried his best to suppress his anger, gritting his teeth. "Listen, my mother knows the truth better than my father. Until today, she still says, I'm the son of the king. I'm the son of Arches." Silence. Silence. The meeting hall is a sacred place. No fighting is allowed, or you'll be banished. Chairman Cleostida warned. Agesilaus pushed his nephew's hand away, and his expression became calmer. He said solemnly, "Respected elders, perhaps you still remember that year when there was an earthquake in Sparta. Arches left his wife and led the guards to provide disaster relief. He was gone for almost a year. Poseidon's anger filled the people of Sparta with reverence. At the same time, this god was the most convincing witness that Leotychides was not the son of Arches. Because of time, Leotychides was only born 10 months after Arches left his wife." As soon as he said this, the elders seemed to be deep in thought. Some of their expressions also became solemn. Nonsense. Leotychides flew into a rage again. He was stopped by the guards who were already prepared, so he could only roar angrily. "All right, that's the end of the candidates' statements." Chairman Cleostida quickly said, "Elders, do you have anything to say?" Diopetus stood up and said, "Everyone, as you know, before this meeting, I had already received Pausanias's authorization to represent the Elder Council to go to Delphi and seek an oracle from Apollo. He warned us, the people of Sparta should beware of the king becoming a cripple. Therefore, I believe that Apollo has already given us a warning. If Agesilaus becomes king, it will definitely bring danger to Sparta." He then passed the parchment in his hand to everyone. Some of the elders nodded as they read. Diopetus glanced proudly at Lysander, who was sitting in front of him, and then made a placating gesture to Leotychides. Agesilaus tried his best to maintain a calm expression, but his hands were clenched tightly behind his back. He saw the elders glancing at his feet from time to time, and he subconsciously moved his left foot back. At this time, Lysander stood up. His influence was great, and he immediately gathered everyone's attention. As we all know, the oracle of Apollo in Delphi has always been profound and difficult to understand. If we only understand it literally, we will often come to a wrong conclusion. Lysander looked around at everyone and said loudly, "Back then, the king of Lydia received the oracle of 'a great kingdom will perish,' and thought that Persia would be defeated. In the end, it was his kingdom that perished. If the people of Athens had really built a wooden wall according to the literal meaning before Persia invaded, they wouldn't have been able to defeat Persia in the naval battle. Therefore, we should understand this oracle more deeply. If the king we elect isn't of the true bloodline of Agis, then wouldn't the system of 2 kings that we are so proud of, the divine bloodline inherited from Hercules, be missing a leg?" It should be said that Lysander's words were thought-provoking. Coupled with his influence, it caused the elders to whisper and discuss non-stop. Leotychides glared at Lysander angrily, but he didn't dare to scold him like he did to Agesilaus. Although his power was intentionally weakened by the Council of Elders a few years after the end of the Peloponnesus War, he was still the hero of the people of Sparta. His rallying power was amazing, and he wasn't someone that an heir to the throne could humiliate. The other king of Sparta, Pausanias, didn't have any obvious bias towards the two heirs to the throne of Agis, but he was very hostile and wary of Lysander, who once wanted to shake the system of two kings. Therefore, he would often oppose anything that Lysander supported. However, in the meeting to elect a new king, according to tradition, the other king could attend, but didn't have the right to make suggestions or vote. This was because the reason why Sparta was a system of two kings was to achieve mutual checks and balances, so the king had to avoid arousing suspicion. Pausanias could only signal to one of his trusted elders, Hippolytus. The elder had to stand up in a hurry and said with a stutter, "Sparta is now the overlord of Greece, but if the king of Sparta is, a person with a disability, it will only cause the other city-states to secretly ridicule Sparta, thus reducing their respect for Sparta. Moreover, we, Sparta, have never had a king with a disability. Never." As soon as he finished speaking, Lysander immediately continued, "That's right, Agesilaus is a cripple. However, he is brave in battle, upright, and has always been respected by our elders and people. He is a traditional and pure warrior of Sparta, and he didn't bring shame to the reputation of the royal family. But please take a closer look at Leotychides. Who do you think he looks like?" Leotychides was strong and handsome, and his appearance was more inherited from his mother. However, under the guidance of Lysander's words and the influence of the rumors, the more the elders looked at him, the more they felt that he looked like the handsome and romantic man of Athens, Alcibiade. Chapter 233. "Diabetes, are you really from Sparta?" Lysander sneered. "Don't forget about Demaratos." The elders were in an uproar. Demaratos was the eternal shame of Sparta. Although the Sparta warriors worshipped killing and despised pleasure, they still liked beautiful women. The best way to judge a future wife was to see if she could bear children easily. The beauty of a Sparta woman was also the best way to judge if she could be the mother of a future child. Training with men from a young age gave the women of Sparta their own unique beauty. They had long blonde hair, strong bodies, and elegant legs. Giving birth to an ugly daughter would make the parents depressed, but there was still a chance to change. That was to go to an ancient sanctuary next to Helen's tomb and pray to the bronze statue of Helen. It was said that the child would grow up to be beautiful. 100 years ago, a pair of Sparta parents prayed to Helen for their ugly daughter. The ugly priestess in charge of the sanctuary grabbed the long hair of the child. After looking at the child's face, she made a prophecy: she would become the cutest woman in Rastman. As time passed, the girl became a famous beauty. Her charm made the king of Sparta fall head over heels for her. He used his royal power to take her away from her husband. Only 7 months later, the new queen gave birth to a son. Was the father of the child the king or the commoner? The people of Sparta did not investigate further. The child grew up and eventually became the king. He was Demaratos. When Demaratos succeeded to the throne, another king of Sparta, Cleomenes, had been on the throne for 5 years. It was much more difficult for him to succeed to the throne because his father could not get his wife pregnant. The elders of the law enforcement council asked him to divorce his wife and remarry. He hesitated for a long time and chose to marry again. Not long after his second wife gave birth to 3 sons, his first wife gave birth to Cleomenes. But the king was already deeply in love with his second wife, and naturally preferred her children. Cleomenes was not favored by his father, and his half-brother, Dorius, was given special training by the king, and was appointed as the legitimate heir. People also thought that Dorius was the best of his generation. However, after the king suddenly died in battle, the conservative people of Sparta believed that Cleomenes, who was the son of the king's first wife, had the right to inherit the throne. Cleomenes, who succeeded to the throne, banished his brothers with the excuse of sending Dorius to colonize the western Mediterranean. Cleomenes was quick-witted, decisive, ambitious, and had a strong desire for power. Demaratos, who had just succeeded to the throne, was no match for him. Soon, he was overthrown by Cleomenes. Cleomenes ruled Sparta for more than 20 years. He defeated Agos, controlled Arcadia, meddled in Delphi, and interfered with the political situation in Athens. Sparta's power expanded to northern Greece. At this time, the king of Persia, Xerxes, was preparing to invade Greece again. Learning from Darius, he sent a large number of spies to divide and alienate the city-state. Ina, an island city-state not far from the east of the Peloponnesus Peninsula, offered land and water to Persia. Cleomenes angrily denounced this treachery and decided to punish Ina. The people of Ina hurriedly asked another king of Sparta, Demaratos, for help. Demaratos was happy to create trouble for his political enemy, so he secretly joined forces with the elders in the council who were not willing to go to war with Persia and actively provided support. This infuriated Cleomenes, and he finally decided to get rid of this intolerable collaborator once and for all. So in the council of elders that he initiated, he questioned the origin of Demaratos. Not only did he win over Demaratos's clansmen and most of the elders, but he also bribed the priest of Delphi, so that the oracle he sought was also unfavorable to Demaratos. As a result, Demaratos, who had been on the throne for 24 years, was deposed from the throne and defected to Xerxes, becoming a traitor who led the way. However, the victorious Cleomenes was not happy for long. His bribery of Delphi was leaked, and the people of Sparta were furious. He was convicted and fled Sparta. Later, he returned, but was removed from power. From then on, he drank, beat people, and cursed. Everyone said he was crazy. His two half-brothers, Leonidas and Cleombrotes, declared him insane and locked him in the temple. The next day, he was found dead. His flesh had been cut off piece by piece, and a knife was beside his hand. This caused a great sensation. Everyone said that this was the punishment for Cleomenes' blasphemy, and it was widely accepted by the public. Suicide. Soon, Leonidas became king. However, privately, there were rumors that Cleomenes died in the hands of his two brothers. The reason why Leonidas led 300 king's guards to Hot Spring Gate to defend against the army of Persia was because of the situation. At the same time, he also wanted to prove his innocence to the people of Sparta. It was a treacherous history for the people of Sparta, and it could even be said to be the shame of Sparta. The meeting hall fell into silence for a while. Chancellor Cleostida simply announced, "Let the election of a new king begin." Whether it was Agesilaus or Leotychides, these two candidates both had their flaws, and they both had their fans. Therefore, the debate between the two was mainly about fighting for the position of the neutral elders, and the final result of the vote was, Agesilaus won. With tears of humiliation in his eyes, Leotychides looked at the elders who congratulated Agesilaus with hatred, and then quietly left. Chancellor Cleostida asked the guards to welcome the 5 censors who had been waiting outside the meeting hall, and announced the result of the election to them. Thus, the censors came before Agesilaus, and Agesilaus stood solemnly, listening to them read out loud. By the great Zeus, according to the results of the election by the Council of Elders, we declare that Agesilaus, the bloodline of the holy Hercules, is the king of Sparta. Agesilaus could no longer maintain his calm expression, and his voice trembled as he swore, "I swear in the name of Zeus, I, Agesilaus, will govern and rule Sparta according to the existing laws of the city." The censors responded at the same time, "As long as you abide by your oath, we will ensure that your royal power is eternal." In February of 398 BC, Agesilaus became the king of Sparta. At the southeast end of Sicily, Dionysius led Syracuse's 80,000 infantrymen, 3,000 cavalrymen, and more than 400 warships on the sea, marching westward along the southern coast of Sicily. When he easily liberated the city-state of Camalina, which was forced to pay tribute to Carthage, Dionysius received the news that Dionia defeated Crotone. He was silent for a while, then said to the attendant beside him, "Write a letter to Philistos immediately. Tell him that I've agreed to Rockley's request to send reinforcements as soon as possible." Then, he asked the messenger to urge the army, which was preparing to rest for a day, to continue marching westward. Crotone has asked for peace with Dionia. After receiving the news from Crotone, the governor of Tarentum, Eumachus, said in surprise, "I really didn't expect that a year ago, Dionia was still a small city-state that needed our protection to survive. Now, it has rapidly developed into a powerful alliance with Greece." The former governor and current senator of the Senate, Decidimus, sighed and said, "Fortunately, we are in an alliance with Dionia. The safety of Tarentum cannot rely on the promises of others." Eumachus shook his head and said firmly, "We should speed up the conquest of the Messapi people and strengthen the power of Tarentum as soon as possible. Only then will we have the confidence to speak when facing Dionia. The capture of Manduria has already caused many casualties among our citizens. But you still want to attack Brindisi. That will cause more Tarentum citizens to be sacrificed. How can the Senate agree to such a radical approach?" Decidimus criticized angrily. Eumachus looked at Decidimus with a trace of contempt in his eyes. "Decidimus, my good friend, haven't you figured it out yet? This is not only the wish of the majority of the senators in the Senate, but also the wish of the people. Stimulated by the rapid rise of Dionia, the people are tired of the inaction of the Senate for decades. They hate the fact that they have to endure the attacks of the Messapi every year. They are asking us to make changes. Although there have been casualties among our citizens, we have taken control of Manduria. It will be much more difficult for the Messapi to invade our territory. Now, Sir Diomyras is about to return to Tarentum, and Archita will continue to lead the army to attack Brindisi. I believe that after Archita learns that Crotone has been forced to ask for peace with Dionia, he will increase his attack on Brindisi without our urging." Decidimus fell into silence. After a moment, he said hesitantly, "I am a little worried that such a large-scale attack will stimulate the Puccetti people in the north. They are from the same race as the Messapi. Will they not hate us if we don't attack?" Eumachus retorted, "As long as we capture Brindisi, not only can we cut off the communication between the Messapi people and the north, but we can also connect to the trade with the Adriatic Sea. There are many benefits to doing this. If we really encounter the Puccetti people that you mentioned, see that our city is empty, and take the opportunity to attack, then we can still—" Eumachus looked at Decidimus. Decidimus understood what he meant and sighed. "Ask for help from our ally Dionia?" Chapter 234. Following that, the General Assembly held an election, and Lucius, who brought peace to Crotone, became the chief general. Although his act of ceding territory was criticized by many, the more than 10,000 citizen soldiers who returned to their homeland thanked him for saving them from hell in time, so most of them voted for him. At the same time, Sesprotes, who participated in the peace talks with Lucius, also became a general. For a time, the conservative faction in the General Executive Committee of Crotone clearly had the upper hand. However, the most urgent task was to defeat Locke and rescue the alliance. The newly formed cabinet of 10 generals in Crotone was very clear about this. After careful consideration, they decided to appoint the 3 experienced captains who were once captured by Dionia as generals. Therefore, the soldiers who had just returned to Crotone had no choice but to go out again. 15,000 soldiers, including 10,000 heavy infantry, in addition to the recruitment of 4,000 freedmen, after preparing their rations, they immediately set off for Corunna. Some people in the council objected, and requested that more citizens be left behind to protect the empty Ciudad Crotone. Although conservative, Lucius was not a coward. Not only did he not agree, he even sent an envoy to Asproustrum, telling the garrison of Dionia that Crotone was now empty and hoped to receive help from the alliance if necessary. At the same time, when they received a clear response from Assists, the Crotone fleet, led by the navy commander Escamas, sailed together with more than 60 warships of various sizes towards Corunna. Just as Crotone and Locke were about to fight, the Senate of Dionia voted to select 5 candidates for Cremissa to enter the Senate. Antares, Euripus, and Predes were all selected. This matter was just the appetizer of the long Senate meeting today. What followed next was the reward for the soldiers who participated in the War of Crotone. Due to the large number of people who participated in the war, Felicius, the military officer, and Raphias, the census officer, only decided on a rough number during the meeting. About 7,000 official citizens would receive 1 to 3 acres of land based on their contributions. The senators, led by the Devers, suggested that as much land as possible be allocated to the citizens in the cities where they lived. Of course, if they were willing to swap, it should be accommodated. About 15,000 registered freedmen participated in the war. According to the law, more than half of them would directly enter the probationary period of official citizens. As the war had obtained a large amount of land and 2 cities, a large number of people were urgently needed to occupy these lands and guard the new cities. Therefore, even though the official citizens' probationary period had not yet ended, the Senate still decided to grant them 5 acres of land in Cremissa, Asproustrum, and northern plains of Crotone. Because they had not become official citizens yet, during this probationary period, they still had to pay 10% of land income. Until official citizens became official citizens, the probationary period would Senate. For nearly 6,000 freedmen who participated in the war, the probationary period for them to become probationary citizens would be halved. At the same time, they would be given the priority to rent land in the city-state. Of course, the 20% tax burden would not change. For the soldiers who sacrificed themselves in the war, regardless of whether they were citizens or freedmen, as long as their relatives were still alive, the Senate would reward them according to the normal soldiers' rewards. At the same time, generous compensation would be given, mainly from the spoils of war. The entire matter of reward and distribution would be handled by the agriculture officer, Berks, and the census officer, Raphias, with the assistance of the 3 army commanders, Capus, Dracos, and Hieronymus. The citizens of Dionia will respond to the call, fulfill their duties, and fight bravely for the alliance. As the helm of the great ship that is the alliance, the Senate must also give them the corresponding rewards and care fairly. We cannot let our warriors shed tears while they bleed. Only in this way can more people contribute to the prosperity and strength of the alliance. Finally, the Devers used a passionate speech to remind Berks and the others who were about to go to work. Next, the discussion was about the candidates for the chief executive of Cremissa and Asproustrum. There were many senators who signed up to run for Cremissa, because it was a seaport city with favorable conditions, and the residents were all Greek. Although it was adjacent to Crotone, they had already become allies, and with Asproustrum at the forefront, the governing environment was relatively safer. The final result of the voting was that Scambras received the highest number of votes, which surprised some people. But after thinking about it carefully, although Scambras had a bad temper, he was a straightforward person who would correct his mistakes. He was not too scheming, and he was willing to help the younger generation. Therefore, many people were willing to associate with him. According to the law of Dionia, the Devers had the final right to veto any proposal in the Senate, but as long as the proposal was reasonable, he rarely used this right. Just like now, he thought that the candidate for the chief executive of Crimea was not bad. Scambras's straightforward personality might win the favor of the Crimeans who were still hostile to the people of Dionia. So, he was the first to congratulate Scambras. "Don't worry, Your Excellency. I will definitely let the people of Cremissa recognize the alliance of Dionia as soon as possible, and at the same time, coordinate the relationship between the local people and the new immigrants. Scombros promised the Devers in high spirits. Having an old man at home was like having a treasure. Before the 50-year-old Scombros took office, he had already grasped the two major problems he needed to solve after becoming the chief executive of Crimea. So, the Devers smiled and said, "With you in Cremissa, the Senate has nothing to worry about." As for the candidate for the chief executive of Asprustum, because the Devers had said in advance that Asprustum was different from Cremissa, it was located in the middle and upper reaches of the Neto River, and from time to time, it would be harassed by the Brudi who swam from the southwest. In the south, it was necessary to be vigilant and deter other Greek city-states from coveting the northern plains of Croton, and at the same time, to coordinate the relationship with the people of Crotone. In addition, the Devers also told the senators that many Lucanian warriors were willing to move to Asprustum. In this way, apart from the Lucaria region, including Nudum, of course, Asprustum had the highest proportion of Lucanian residents among the cities of Dionia. Therefore, the requirements for the chief executive of Asprustum were higher. First of all, he must have strong military skills, a certain amount of administrative experience, and a strong ability to coordinate. At the same time, he must be able to make the Lucanians, who had just joined Dionia and were still somewhat undisciplined, obedient. For senators like Amendolara and Turiai who had suffered from the war, there was always an indelible fear in their hearts when they were asked to deal with the war independently. Vespa and Hemont loved to take the initiative to give suggestions when it came to Lucania, but when it came to the affairs of the Greek city-states, they would always watch calmly from the sidelines and act as the voting machine. Most of the mercenary senators were either unwilling to deal with administrative affairs, or they were not competent enough. Those who were more competent in administrative affairs, such as Antonios and Alexis, held important public positions and could not leave. Therefore, when the rotating chairman, Cornelis, announced that the people who were willing to be the chief executive of Asprustum would raise their hands, for a moment no one responded. When the Devers saw this, he was a little surprised. A name appeared in his mind, Assists. However, Assists was not a member of the Senate, and according to the regulations, he could not take the position of the chief executive of the city. Only then did he realize that before the Dionia Alliance Public Service Law was promulgated, it was difficult for the former mercenaries who did not become a member of the Senate to enter the Senate and become a senator. For these guys, most of whom only wanted to fight, it was undoubtedly impossible for them to re-engage in administrative affairs and rise through the ranks. It seemed that there was a need to add a few provisions in the public service law specifically for the senior generals of the Legion to enter the Senate. As the Devers pondered, he saw someone in the crowd raise his hand. Helos. It turned out to be Helos, the former captain of the Devers and their most capable confidant, Helos. Some time ago, the Devers were busy with administrative affairs, and Helos was serving as the captain of the Amendolara patrol. Other than meeting in the Senate, the two did not have many opportunities to meet. However, the Devers still understood Helos's performance. With the prosperity of the warehouses, accommodation, and food in Amendolara, there was a large influx of foreigners, but there had been no major conflicts. Helos's performance was the greatest credit. His ability to deal with emergencies and his fairness in resolving conflicts between the residents and foreigners were praised by the people of Amendolara and the chief executive, Cornelis. As for his military ability, the Devers' evaluation was that he was good at using troops, which was just right for Asprustum, which was located in a special geographical location. They believed that with his rich mercenary experience, it would not be a big problem to convince the Lucanians. As for his administrative experience, the Devers thought about it. They could let the Assists stay in Asprustum for a while and help Helos deal with administrative affairs. They believed that with Helos's serious attitude and learning, He would soon be able to govern independently. After waiting for a while, there was still only Helos. Cornelius had no choice but to announce that the candidate for the chief executive of Asprustum was Helos. I agree with Helos as the chief executive of Asprustum. He is the most suitable candidate. The Devers were the first to express their support. Chapter 235. Helos thanked Cornelius for his compliment. I'll ask Amendolara to recommend a suitable patrol captain, the Devers said. Cornelius immediately perked up. Go ahead, Sir Consul. Epiphanes. He'll make an excellent patrol captain, the Devers said confidently, pointing to the back row. Huh! Epiphanes, who was talking to Xpit in a low voice, did not expect to be called. Why me? He asked in surprise. So that you can focus more on the administration of the alliance and be a good role model for your soldiers instead of wasting your time on the youngsters of Dionia, the Devers said half-jokingly. The crowd burst into laughter. Everyone knew that Epiphanes liked handsome young men. Many elders had the same hobby, but Epiphanes was more obvious about it. It was not only a fashion, but also a tradition, for the Greeks to like young men and guide them. Although the Devers did not like it, they still showed their respect and did not want to force the change. Apart from that, what the Devers admired the most about Epiphanes was his ability to think calmly on the battlefield and react flexibly in complex situations. He always completed the tasks given to him, and even exceeded expectations. Under the pressure of divers and the repeated pleas of Cornelius, Epiphanes had no choice but to agree. Epiphanes' helpless expression made Amyntas and the rest burst into laughter again. It was already past noon when the meeting went on. Cornelius announced a half-hour recess. The slaves who had been waiting outside the Senate immediately came in and gave their masters food and water to fill their stomach. The Devers did not have any free time even after the half-hour recess. He munched on his bread while discussing with Scambras and Helos about the problems they needed to solve after taking office, as well as how the two cities could cooperate and strengthen communication to deal with any situation that might arise in the south. Then, Cunigarata found him to discuss the arrangement of the 5 new Senate elders. As an elder of the Senate, his family should naturally be settled in Turin so that it would be convenient for him to perform his duties. Even if he became the governor of another city, he would not move away from his mansion in Turin. After all, the governor only served for 2 years, while the elders served for life. There was still a lot of unused public land in Turin that was under the control of the Senate and would not be given away easily. Allocating a small piece of land for the new elder to build a house was naturally not free of charge. The Land of Dionysia Act clearly stipulated that even if divers wanted to buy the land, he would still have to pay the market price. Due to the influx of people over the past year, the price of residential land in Turin had risen again. The price would rise even more after Dionia defeated Crotone. Cunigarata hoped that the Senate would sell the land to the new elders at the original price in order to show the sincerity of the Senate of Dionia and appease the newcomers. The Devers agreed. He also considered that if any of the 5 new Cremissa elders could not afford the money, the national treasury could pay for it first and repay it later. The half-hour break was over and the Senate meeting continued. The Devers stood up and said his first proposal. Although Dionia won the war against Crotone this time, some problems were exposed. The most important and urgent one is the navy. As soon as the Devers' voice fell, it immediately resonated with the elders. The consul is right. In this war, the biggest loss that the Crotone caused us was their fleet's continuous onshore raid. They burned many Turin villages and killed many of our people. Until now, the civil servants of Turin are still having a headache trying to resettle the people and rebuild their homes. Cunigarata complained. If Dionia had a navy as strong as our army, Crotone would have surrendered when we won the war. There would be no need to surround Cremissa. Amyntas emphasized. The trade of the Dionia alliance is getting more and more prosperous. Dionia's territory is expanding rapidly. We need a strong fleet to protect our trade, to prevent our long coastline from being ambushed by enemy fleets and our ports from being blockaded by enemy warships. Marigi reminded loudly. That's right. We need a strong navy to protect the safety of the Dionia alliance. The others agreed. Since we've reached a consensus, my suggestion is. The Devers looked at the others and said, other than speeding up the completion of the three-tiered ore warships that are under construction, we'll build 7 more this year. I've asked Inanilos, and Turin's shipyards don't have enough docks to fulfill such a large order. Cremissa also has a larger shipyard that can build 3-tiered ore warship. We can give them a small portion of the order to fulfill. In the future, we'll build 10 3-tiered ore warships every year until we have 50 3-tiered ore warships in 5 years. At the same time, we'll be equipped with 20 medium-sized warships, 100-man warships, and 10 small warships, 50-man warships. That way, we'll have a relatively strong Dionia navy with 80 warships. The others agreed that the plan was feasible. Only Mercis objected. No. This way, the Alliance will have to spend more than 100 talent every year. That's too much. Although it's a little too much, I think our treasury will be able to handle it. Last year, the treasury received more than 200 talent just from the land tax, rent tax, and trade tax. This year, Marigi's lowest estimate is that the treasury's revenue will at least double. When the Devers said this, many of the elders were shocked. Unknowingly, Dionia's treasury's revenue was almost equal to that of Tarantum and Crotone. Taking out a small portion of the money to build a fleet should be more than enough. Everyone, Lord Mercis, actually, building 10 3-tiered ore warships every year won't cost more than 100 talent. Marigi stood up and reminded everyone, the cost of building a warship is mainly divided into 2 parts. One is the wood and the other is the manufacturing cost. In the mountains of our alliance's territory, especially in Lucania, there are countless high-quality cedar trees that are most suitable for building 3-tiered ore warships. I heard that Athens had a special agreement with Turis. Every year, Turis had to provide Athens with a certain amount of shipbuilding wood. There was indeed such an agreement. Turis had to provide Athens with at least 1,000 pieces of shipbuilding wood every year, and if necessary, the number could be doubled, Inanilos said. Back then, in order to complete this agreement, the Turis had cut down a lot of trees for decades. Although they earned some money from the wood, the older cedar trees in the mountains around Turis became fewer and fewer. Moreover, there were more than a dozen large shipyards in Athens, so there was no need for them to build ships in Turis. Inanilos's family had always complained about this. Later, because of excessive logging, many barren hills appeared around Turis. Only then did the people discover this drawback. They began to buy wood from other Greek city-states and resell it to Athens, earning a little bit of the difference. In the later stages of the war between Athens and Sparta, we were forced to cancel this agreement after the Sparta navy gained the upper hand, Cunagurata added. Devers nodded. After becoming the alliance consul, he understood this agreement. He even believed that when General Pericles of Athens agreed to build Turis and called for the establishment of a great pan-Hellenic city-state, one of the real strategic purposes was for wood. Athens had 2 natural flaws. First, it didn't produce a lot of food, and it had to rely on imports to maintain the huge population of the city-state. Therefore, along the coast of Greece to the Black Sea, it built many colonies or controlled city-states in key locations, such as Byzantium, to ensure the smooth transportation of food from the Black Sea. It needed a powerful navy, and the people of Athens were ambitious to establish a powerful Mediterranean Greek city-state alliance, so they needed a powerful navy even more. However, the second flaw of Athens was that it didn't have a lot of forests, and it didn't have trees that could make high-quality warship. Also, with the size of Athens' navy and merchant ships, the amount of wood they needed was massive. Therefore, finding wood for ships became a strategic issue that determined whether Athens could maintain its strength or not. Egypt didn't have forests. Persia had wood, but they wouldn't sell it to the enemy, Athens. Northern Greece and Thrace had forests, but they were inland, and it was difficult to cut and transport the wood. Therefore, Greece, which was surrounded by the Apennines Mountains, became an important place for Athens to buy wood, and Turis, which was built by the people of Athens, was the main source of wood. Therefore, I asked the Senate to discuss a plan to allow the slaves of the alliance to cut a certain number of cedars every year to make wood for the warship. It doesn't cost a single opal. As for the production fee, Marigi looked at Enanilus and jokingly said, I think Mr. Enanilus will not charge too much. Enanilus smiled helplessly. Everyone felt that Marigi's words made sense, and the worry about the cost dissipated a lot. But have you considered the maintenance of these warships after they are built? It's also not a small cost. Merja said, unconvinced. Enanilus and I have discussed this issue before, Devers said. Enanilus nodded to show that it was true. When there is no war, of course, we won't leave the warships idle at the docks. Other than a small number of them patrolling the coast of the Alliance, and some of them in the docks for maintenance, the rest can be used as guards for merchant ships, especially on the route from the Adriatic Sea to the mainland of Greece, where pirate attacks are frequent. They can also temporarily serve as large cargo ships to transport goods to friendly city-states. You see, not only can we earn maintenance fees for our navy, but we can also train the crew's sailing skills at the same time. Isn't that good? After Devers said his thoughts, Merja stopped talking. Chapter 236. The senators looked at each other and did not speak for a while. The former mercenary senators were proficient in land battles, but not in naval ones. The Lucaria senators knew how to fight in the mountains, but were fearful of the sea. Amendola had no ports or warships, so the senators naturally had no experience in naval battles. The only ones left were the Turis senators. Cunigarata looked at the others and said, I recommend Enanilus. He was originally a general of the Turis navy. The other Turis senators also expressed their agreement. The Devers also recognized Enanilus's talent in this area, or they would not have discussed with him about the establishment of the navy. The only worry was that Enanilus's family owned a shipyard, and the Devers were worried that he would use it for his own personal gain. But on second thought, the shrewd and stingy Merces was not easy to fool. Compared to the talented army, there were too few people who knew how to fight on the sea. Devers sighed in his heart. In the end, Enanilus successfully became the commander of the navy of Dionia. He said with an excited expression, We, Dionia, have strong heavy infantry. I no longer have to worry about our warships being burnt to the ground before they even leave the port. It seemed that when Turis was captured by Crotone, he was still brooding over the fact that Turis warships were either destroyed or captured. The army of Dionia has already made a name for itself. What I can do is to lead this new navy to actively cooperate with the army, and create a greater victory for the alliance of Dionia. After Enanilus finished speaking, all the senators, including Amintas, smiled and applauded Enanilus's inauguration. Polixus stared at Enanilus's back, a hint of a smile on his face. The second proposal of the Devers was about the construction of the road from Castellan to Cremissa to Aspustum. As soon as this proposal was made, it was unanimously approved by all the senators. The Dionia alliance had already enjoyed the benefits of building the avenue. Even if the Devers did not mention it, the other elders would have made similar proposals. By this time the people of Dionia had developed quite a difference of opinion from the rest of the Greek. They no longer believed that a city only needed to be well connected by sea, and did not need to think much about road. Not only did they care about sea routes, but they also believed that building good roads was an essential infrastructure for the development of a city. However, the Devers' second proposal did not end there. He continued, When we besieged Cremissa, the messengers sent messages between Turiae and Cremissa every day. They traveled more than 100 miles back and forth, and the horses were exhausted. Sometimes, important messages could not be delivered in time. As the territory of the Dionia Alliance expands, the cities at the border will only get further away from Turii. How can we keep abreast of the situation in the other cities of Dionia so that the Senate can respond to any sudden incidents in time? The Devers' question caused everyone to ponder. We have merchant ships that come and go frequently, so we can keep abreast of the situation in the other cities. We can set up a special kind of boat to deliver letters. It's fast and doesn't consume horses, Marigi suggested. There are several problems with using the sea route to deliver letters. First, ships can't sail during storms, especially in winter. Second, this is only suitable for port cities. Inland cities like Nudum and Asplustum can't deliver letters. Third, during war, it's easy to be intercepted because the sea is too big to be completely defended. Moreover, the army can't always march along the coastline. So how can urgent orders and letters be delivered from the ship to the commander in time? The Devers pointed out the drawbacks of using ships to deliver messages. Marigi was speechless. He said embarrassedly, "Sir, I haven't thought about it yet. It seems that we still have to go by land. We are now building roads to connect all the cities of Dionia. This way, it should be faster and more convenient to use mules and horses to deliver letters," Cornelis said. "You're right. We should prioritize the land route and supplement it with the sea route. I think what we should do now is to arrange for specialized public officials to be responsible for the delivery of letters and make it a daily affair of the city-state. So, I suggest that the Alliance set up a post office," the Devers said confidently. A post office? When everyone heard the Devers say this word, they found it strange. It was obviously coined by the Devers themselves. The main function of the post office is to receive letters and parcels from the people of Dionia, and then deliver these things to the recipients. The Devers gestured with his hands and explained patiently, "We will set up a post office in every city with public officials. They will receive and deliver letters every day. At the same time, we will set up courier stations every 40 to 50 miles on the main roads, and they will also be staffed with public officials. There will be simple hotels in the courier stations, and horses will be kept. When the messengers arrive at the courier stations, they can rest and drink water before continuing on their journey. In this way, while the post office serves the people during normal times, news from other cities will be gathered through it to the Senate every day so that we can understand what is happening in the territory of Dionia, and during wartime, the messengers of the army can use our main road system to go to various courier stations to replenish food and water, change horses, and quickly convey the orders of the army. This is a wonderful idea, as expected of the favored." Cunigurata could not help but praise. If the post office is established, not only will it be convenient for the army and the people, but it will also strengthen the relationship between the people of various cities. The cities of the Alliance of Dionia will become closer. I think, in the future, we can also set up a post office in our alliance to strengthen our communication with them. As an experienced former consul, Cunigurata could see the bright future that the establishment of a post office would bring to the Alliance of Dionia at a glance. "I hope the post office can be established as soon as possible. When I reach Cremissa, I won't have to worry too much about my children," Scombros said happily. "I heard that you always scold. They don't listen to you and you don't want to live with them, right?" Strompoli asked, pretending to be curious. Scombros raised his head. "You don't have children, you don't understand. Don't talk nonsense." His words almost caused Strompoli to quarrel with him. Everyone laughed and tried to calm them down. Mirzas stood up with a bitter expression. "Consul, we have to build a post office and relay station. How much will the cost of these buildings, the salaries of the civil servants, and the cost of rearing the horses be spent on the national treasury?" Without the need for the Devers to explain, Marigi spoke first. "Mercies, do you still not understand? Does the post office need to pay for delivering letters and parcels to the people? There are hotels in the courier stations. Do people need to pay to stay there? I really don't know how you became a financial officer. Marigi seized the opportunity to make a run at Mercy's. Mercy's didn't mind. Instead, he asked the Devers anxiously, "Do we need to pay for delivering a letter? How much?" The Devers nodded. The main purpose of setting up a post office is to deliver messages and make it convenient for the people, so it can't be too expensive. I think 1 letter for 1 opal is enough. As for the delivery of parcels, the price depends on their size and weight. Let Marigi and the person in charge of the post office discuss this. 1 letter for 1 opal. I think the people will be happy to accept this price. I'm afraid the post office will be very busy in the future. Cornelis smiled. Because after we distribute the land this time, many of the citizens' land will be distributed to different cities. We need this post office to deliver messages and strengthen the management of the land. Cornelis's words resonated with many of the elders. Not just the ordinary citizens, but also the land they were distributing. Therefore, they all agreed with the Deverses' proposal. Mercy's was still calculating the income of the post office. When he realized that the income was considerable, he immediately asked, "Will the income of the post office be handed over to the national treasury?" After deducting the salaries of civil servants and various costs, the remaining income will naturally be handed over to the national treasury. The Deverses' words made Mercy smile. In addition, I propose to set up a road bureau. It will be responsible for the planning, construction, maintenance of all the roads in the Alliance, as well as the management of roadside facilities. The Deverses' proposal received the approval of the elders. They enjoyed the benefits of the road, but at the same time, they knew that after a road was built, it needed long-term professional maintenance. Otherwise, it would become dilapidated in a few years. In the future, there will be a fee for using the road, right? Mercy's looked at the Devers hopefully. For free, Divers spat out 2 words. Building a road between cities will cost at least 30 talent. This does not include the cost of the land, because the land used for the road was planned before the land was distributed to the citizens. It belongs to the Alliance, so there is no need to spend money. Otherwise, including the price of buying the land, the cost would be many times higher. The subsequent maintenance costs are also being spent at any time. Can't we charge a little money? Mercy's pleaded. Roads are different from the post office. If we charge a fee, most of the citizens can choose not to use the road we built. This will not affect their travel. On the contrary, it will cause the road we worked so hard to build to serve the citizens, but in the end, only a few people use it. This goes against the original purpose of building the road, the Devers explained seriously. Chapter 237. Everyone thought about it and shook their heads. Athens might be the wealthiest, but it could not provide so many benefits to its citizens. As a city-state with a long history, there were too many vested interest groups, deep-rooted legal systems, and traditional ideologies. It could not do all that the emerging city-state alliance of Dionia could do, even though it was considered to be very considerate of its citizens among the Greek city-states. Can the powerful Persia of the Mediterranean do all this? Plesinas asked loudly again. Everyone shook their heads. Persia was a dictatorship where the nobles oppressed the civilians, and the Persia oppressed the other races. Then, Dionia is the Elysium of the Greek city-states. I believe that after the Greeks know the rights that our citizens enjoy, they will definitely pour into Dionia more actively. Plesinas said with certainty. Plesinas's guess should be right. Before the war with Crotone, the number of free citizens in the port of Turin had been increasing, and after the war we fulfilled our promise and even distributed land to the preparatory citizens. There will definitely be more immigrants pouring into Dionia. We need to make preparations to settle them down. Cunagurata took over the conversation and reminded everyone in advance. Everyone was both happy and worried when they heard that. Now, please allow me to add one more right for the citizens of Dionia. Devers continued, I noticed that when everyone heard Cunagurata say that more immigrants will come to Dionia, they all seemed a little worried. Worried about what? I think it's more that they are worried that the Dionia Alliance will not be able to maintain good order in the city. They are worried that with so many immigrants, most of them are civilians without education. When they all become citizens of Dionia, the overall quality of our citizens will decline. It will decline rapidly. Lord Devers is right. Turin Senator Masasakus immediately stood up and loudly criticized. Now there are already such signs in Turin, especially in the port. The new immigrants with all kinds of accents are rude and uneducated. They curse and fight at the drop of a hat. I heard that the port patrol has to deal with dozens of conflicts a day. Isn't that right, Cunagurata? Cunagurata shook his head and said seriously, "It's not that serious. If a free citizen wants to smoothly become a citizen of the Alliance, they don't dare to break the law. According to statistics, there are no more than 5 cases a day, and most of them settle themselves before the patrols arrive." Masasakas asked for a snub and muttered, 3 or 4 conflicts a day, that's not a small number. Polixus looked at Masasakus, his eyes flashing. Devers smiled and said, "Because of these problems, my next proposal is to set up a school in Turii. All the citizens of Dionia can send their children to the school to learn literacy, arithmetic, drawing, music, and sports after paying a small fee. School?" Everyone pondered over this new term. At this time, the Athens school had not yet been established. The Greeks' method of education mainly relied on wealthy nobles and the rich to hire private tutors and buy learned slaves to educate their children. Or famous scholars opened private schools, charged exorbitant tuition fees, and recruited disciples. It was still unheard of for the city-state to fund the construction of a school to collectively educate the children of its citizens. But the senators were very interested, and most of them felt that this could really help solve the problem of the low literacy of the citizens of Dionia, so they all stood up and asked questions. Devers was very familiar with schools. Combining the experience of his previous life with the reality of this life, he easily answered their questions. For example, Amyntas asked, "What if the citizens also want to study in the school?" Devers answered, "Set up a special class in the school to educate adults. Its curriculum and education methods are different from children's, so it is convenient to quickly eliminate illiteracy." For example, Cunagurata asked, "The children are of different ages and have different levels of education. How can they benefit and improve in the school?" Devers answered, "Set up 3 levels of education: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Children who have never learned anything will enter the beginner class and begin to learn how to read, count, and read articles. For those who are already literate and have a certain foundation in arithmetic, they will enter the intermediate class and learn how to use words to form sentences, write articles, and do complex calculations. The advanced class will mainly master rhetoric, speech, debate, and calculate a large number of complex data. This is to prepare for the cultivation of high-level talents such as lawyers, accountants, and intermediate officials." The senators were satisfied with the detailed answers of Devers. Even Cunagurata, who rarely praised others in public, could not help but exclaim, "Senor Consul, I now really think that you have the blessing of the gods. Otherwise, it is impossible for you to come up with so many wonderful ideas and a complete implementation plan." Cunagurata's words were approved by the senators. Devers smiled and continued, "I propose that Ansitanos be the person in charge of this school." Agreed. The elders all expressed their agreement. The most knowledgeable person in the Senate was undoubtedly Ansitanos, who was once a disciple of Herodotus. Of course, there were also people who thought that the Devers, who was rumored to be illiterate but had always been mysterious because of Pluto's revelation, had unfathomable knowledge. Ansitanos, who was sitting in the back row, was awakened and hurriedly shook his head and refused. I don't have time. The history of the Peloponnesus War written by Thucydides of Athens has been completed, and it is said that it has been very well received by the people of Athens, but I haven't even started writing my history of Great Greece. Under the repeated requests of the senators, Devers even promised everyone that all the senators would do their best to contribute materials for his creation, and if he wanted to interview someone, they would do their best to cooperate. Ansitanos reluctantly accepted, but he immediately began to complain. Sirs, it's not that I don't want to manage the school just now, but you have to know that there are thousands of children in the Dionia Alliance, including the city of Thurii. And you just said that you want them to learn Greek words, arithmetic, drawing, music, and so on. How many teachers do you need? The Dionia Alliance can't find so many teachers to teach the children. After hearing what he said, everyone immediately realized that this was indeed a problem. But Devers had obviously thought about it long ago, and he said unhurriedly, "The Dionia Alliance doesn't have enough teachers, but the other city-states do. We are in urgent need of rosin, and we can reduce the tariff for it to encourage the merchants of Cyrenaica to ship it into the port of Thurii in large quantities to sell. We lack teachers, so of course we can make a preferential bill for them to encourage outstanding foreign scholars to come to Dionia. Am I right?" The senators were deep in thought, and Ansitanos asked anxiously, "What kind of bill?" "My proposal is that all foreigners who come to Dionia to become teachers, even if they are slaves, will immediately be granted citizenship in Dionia. But the premise is that they first have to pass the assessment of a specialized agency of the Senate to determine that they have the ability to be teachers. Well, Ansitanos, you can take the lead in this assessment. But once they have citizenship and become teachers of the Alliance, they must devote their lives to teaching children. If they change professions halfway, their citizenship will be revoked immediately and they will be expelled. In addition, the citizenship of the Alliance only applies to the teachers themselves, and their children cannot inherit it unless they also become teachers." Everyone was moved by the Devers proposal. Ansitanos, who did not care about being the school administrator at first, said with some excitement at this moment, "Since Lord Plazinas and Cunigurata think that the Greeks are envious of the citizens of Dionia and want to become citizens of Dionia, then I think the situation of the lack of teachers in Dionia will soon change. I remember that there was an alliance bill specially made for doctors, and now there is a bill for teachers that is beneficial to them. My lords, doctors and teachers are the two sacred professions besides the priests of the gods. One heals the body and the other improves the mind. I thank the governor for your vision. I also hope to get your support. The Senate of Dionia has fully demonstrated its respect for knowledge. It will make our alliance not only prosperous in trade, strong in military, but also glorious in culture. The alliance of Dionia will become a great city-state alliance." The meeting went on until dusk, and there were still two people who had proposals to make. The senators had to let the guards light the candles and continue the meeting. The first to speak was Scambras. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry for delaying your dinner time. I've just consulted Lord Devers, Capus, and Hieronymus in detail. I learned that there is a large swamp north of Cremissa. Especially in spring, when the rain floods, the swamp will expand outwards, affecting the road traffic and encroaching on the farmland. I'm wondering if we can invest a lot of labor to fill up the swamp and build a dam for the Lakili River. This will ensure the safety of the territory, prevent the outbreak of diseases, and add a large area of fertile land. You've just been elected as the governor of Cremissa. You haven't even taken office, but you've already begun to implement your management of Cremissa." Protesilaus joked with a smile. Chapter 238. Protesilaus shrugged and did not speak. The technology of draining and filling swamps, depressions, and tidal flats is a mature technology that is often used by us Greeks. The tourists used to build dams on the banks of the upper reaches of the Cosini River during the rainy season. We can do what Sir Scambras suggested. Cunigurata asked seriously, But to fill such a large swamp area into farmland, we will need to invest a lot of manpower and resources. Have you considered all these? Didn't you just say that there will be a large influx of free people in Dionia in the future? We can recruit a large number of them to work on this project. For these free people who have made great contributions to the Dionia Alliance, not only should we shorten their citizen probation period as an incentive, we can also consider giving them land in the swamp area to encourage them to work harder. Also, we have to consider the breeding grounds of mosquitoes. I hope that Herpes can send doctors to help the sick at any time to prevent epidemics from happening. Scombros said incessantly. Although he had never been a governor of a city, he had put his heart and soul into his role as the governor of Cremissa. He used his long life experience to carefully consider the problem, so he was more thoughtful. Of course, that's not a problem, Herpes said immediately. We can provide help at any time. Mercies, don't feel bad about the money. Scombros turned to the financial officer and said loudly, as long as the swamp area is successfully transformed, how much farmland can we provide? How much land tax can you collect? And these are available every year. Use your brain and think about it. Mercies raised his hand helplessly. Sir, don't think about it, I agree. Does anyone have any objections? Cornellos asked. Everyone, including the Devers, shook their heads. Scombros had settled this matter by himself. Wespa was the next to stand up. My lords, I have received news from Nudum. Potentia's army is approaching the Grimentum. Sinsing may be worried about the tribes of the Grimentum that he annexed by force, so he did not come out to fight. He defended the city of Grimentum and sent people to Nudum, hoping to ally with us against Potentia. Sinsing has a good idea. Devers smiled faintly. What do you think of this? Wespa hesitated for a moment, then said, I don't think there's a need to form an alliance with Picassus. The previous events have already proven that Sinsing is completely untrustworthy. Moreover, no matter who wins the battle between Potentia and Picassus, the strength of both sides will be weakened, which is very beneficial to Dionia. Devers was happy to see that Wespa could think this way. It meant that he was used to life in the alliance, which was why he would consider the interests of the alliance. Thus, he said, Lord Wespa is right. Of course, we will not forcefully reject him. We will just say that Dionia has just gone through a war and needs to rest and reorganize, so we cannot start another war. Wespa nodded in understanding. At this time, Hemont said, not only Sinsing has expressed goodwill to us, but the tribes of the Grimentum have also secretly sent people to contact us, hoping to get our help in driving away the Pixie and Potentia people. What are they prepared to pay? Devers asked. They said, we are willing to let the Grimentum become a subsidiary of Dionia, Hemont replied. This condition seems to be worth considering, Protesilaus said, a little tempted. Devers looked at him, then at the other senators who expressed their agreement, then sneered and said, these tribes once betrayed their great leader, Luzo, and later had a conflict with Pixie. The Grimentum wants to use this statement to make Dionia start a war with the two major forces of Lucaria, Potentia and Pixie. Is this even possible? Now that Cremissa and Aspustum need a large number of citizens and prospective citizens to settle down, the army of Dionia will need to reorganize and divide up the areas for a period of time, so there is no way they can send enough soldiers to Lucaria. Besides, Bagul, how effective do you think our heavy infantry can be in the Lucaria mountains? Bagul thought for a moment, then said frankly, we were able to seize Nudum because of a sneak attack, not a direct confrontation with the Lucanian warriors. However, if the heavy infantry were to fight with the Lucanian warriors in the mountains, I'm afraid it would be difficult for them to gain the upper hand. Just walking on the mountain roads will consume a lot of the soldiers' energy, not to mention that we are not familiar with the terrain. On the narrow mountain roads, the enemy does not need to fight us head-on at all. They only need to push a few stones to make us suffer heavy losses, not to mention the difficulty of transporting food. Bagul is right. When we had to pass through the mountains to Armenia in Persia, we often encountered similar difficulties. No matter how brave the heavy infantry is, they would not be able to play a role at all. Alexis immediately said, and then the former mercenary senators also expressed their agreement with Bagul's words. Even the elders with the most combat experience were not optimistic about fighting in the mountains, which made Protesilaus feel a little ashamed. However, he was able to recognize his mistake and said embarrassedly, "It seems that the consecutive victories recently have made me a little proud." The senators who agreed to accept the Grimentum tribe's conditions also lowered their heads in shame. In the past, in Turiai and Amendola, war was a painful thing. However, ever since the Devers came, it seemed that victory was easy, giving everyone the illusion that the soldiers of Dionia were invincible. Thus, everyone began to become a little arrogant. However, the Devers did not lose their vigilance. He clearly remembered that when Rome began to conquer the Italian mainland, the biggest obstacle they encountered was not the coastal Greek city-states, nor was it the tough Gaul tribes in the north, but the Simonians in the central mountains. When the Roman heavy infantry, who dominated the plains, attacked the Simonians in the mountains, it was almost impossible for them to advance. The battle lasted for decades, during which the Roman people suffered several defeats and were forced to beg for peace in humiliation. Of course, the Devers did not want to repeat the mistakes of Rome. "Are we not going to attack Lucania? Your Excellency Consul, don't forget that you promised us to occupy Lucania municipality." At this time, someone stood up and questioned the Devers. It was Polixus. Cunigurata, Bucos, and the others all frowned. Capus, Amintas, and the others were even more hesitant, but the Devers looked calm. "We are not attacking Lucania municipality, but it does not mean that we will give it up. The war between Potentia and Pixie will undoubtedly affect the small tribes scattered in the land near the Grimentum and the ordinary people in the city. Hemont told me that the Lucanians who escaped to Nudum said that Pixie and Potentia are plundering their cattle, sheep, and belongings, and forcibly recruiting them as vanguards." "Yes, Your Excellency Consul. When these people arrived in Nudum, and saw that the Lucanians who had become citizens of Dionia were living a prosperous life, they were very envious. Now they all hope that peace can be restored in the Grimentum, so that they can continue to live a quiet life under the protection of a powerful force." Hemont said solemnly, "And the only one who can help them realize this beautiful wish is us, Dionia. So, please send more people around the Grimentum. It would be best if they can sneak into the city, so that these Lucanians who have been hurt by the war can understand this." The Devers instructed. Hemont nodded in agreement. "Bagul, after you go back, tell Sesta to gather all the young Lucanians in Nudum, and you will train them according to the original Lucanian way of fighting. However, it is best to follow the current way of organizing the troops, because it will be more disciplined. Also, make sure to keep it a secret, don't let the enemy in the north know." The Devers' words made Bagul excited, and he asked, "When do we attack?" "Wait for the right time." The Devers spat out a sentence, then looked around at everyone, and said in a firm tone, "I would rather let Potentia and Galagusso become Dionia's vassals than let the Grimentum be out of our control. The location of the Grimentum city is very important. It controls the land routes to the north, east, and west of Italy, so it must be controlled by Dionia personally." The Crotone troops had just arrived at Silatina, and after meeting up with a small number of reinforcements sent by Trine and Silatina, they continued south. The Crotone fleet had been sailing south, and had long passed Silatina, and was about to reach the sea near Corunna. At this time, the scout ship at the front sent back a message. Lockleigh's fleet was spotted in the sea ahead, about 40 ships. The commander of the Crotone navy, Ascamas, immediately ordered the fleet to slow down, lower the sails, line up, and prepare for battle. Soon, the warships that received the order gathered together, forming a formation with the three-tier or warship in the center, and the other warships of different sizes on both sides, sailing as close to the coast as possible. Because it was the east wind, even though the sails were lowered, the sailors could still use the wind to save some energy, so the fleet tried to seize the upper hand. Before the formation was completed, Locklei's fleet had already appeared less than a nautical mile away from them. Escamas decisively ordered, "Speed up and prepare to attack." Chapter 239. Although Locklei's fleet had fewer warships, they did not hesitate to launch an attack. The warships of both sides quickly sailed towards each other and intersected with each other. However, Locklei's warships did not stop and continued to advance, which was out of the expectations of Crotone's fleet. Thus, after paying a small price of 1 or 2 warships, they easily broke away from Crotone's fleet. Were the Rockley fleet trying to escape? Escamas was surprised to see the Rockley fleet's performance. However, the Rockley fleet's actions once again surprised him. After putting some distance between them and the Crotone fleet, the Rockley fleet turned around again and assumed an attacking stance. Escamas did not think too much about it. Why did the Rockley fleet do this? His fleet also responded accordingly. The two fleets quickly approached each other again, but this time, the Rockley fleet did not escape. The warships of both sides clashed and collided with each other. Battles at sea were different from those on land. Battles on land were extremely particular about formation. Once the formation was broken, it usually meant defeat. On the other hand, once a battle at sea began, the formation would be broken. It was usually a one-on-one duel between warships. Victory depended on the quality of the warship and the skills of the captain and sailors. Crotone and Rockley had been enemies for decades, so they knew each other very well. Escamas was very clear about the strength of the fleet, the composition of the crew, and even the characteristics of the commanders. He firmly believed that with the 6 extra 3-layered oars in his fleet, which had a total advantage of 10 warships over the Rockley fleet, it was only a matter of time before they won this battle. During the battle, Escamas's warship retreated quickly and skillfully, narrowly avoiding the enemy ship's attack on the middle of the warship. After the danger was averted, the enemy ship landed horizontally in front of the bow of his warship, the bronze ram. This was a great opportunity. How could he let it go? He immediately ordered the sailors to quickly regroup, and the ship quickly moved forward. However, the enemy ship also quickly turned its bow towards Escamas's ship. Although the enemy ship's reaction was fast, the experienced Escamas did not give up. As the warship approached the enemy ship and was about to cross paths, Escamas shouted, "Retract!" The boatswain, who was listening to the order in the lower cabin, immediately relayed it to the sailors. The well-trained sailors immediately pulled back the oars. The enemy ship had just turned the bow and had not yet had the time to pull back the oars. The 20-meter-long 3-story oar ship used the huge inertia of the forward charge to smash most of the wooden oars of the enemy ship that was close to it, causing the enemy ship to fall into a predicament where it could not move forward without oars. Just as the sailors were cheering and Escamas was about to turn his ship around and sink it, a fleet of more than 20 triple hulls suddenly appeared behind Crotone's fleet and immediately launched an attack on Crotone's ship. The Crotone fleet was in danger of being attacked from both the north and the south. In the end, the Crotone fleet suffered a crushing defeat. 15 ships were sunk, 8 were captured, and 10 were severely damaged. Escamas led a few warships out of the enemy's encirclement. On the way to Crotone, Escamas kept thinking in frustration, where did Rockley's extra warships come from? The victory of the naval battle encouraged Rockley's army that was besieging Corunna. The next morning, when Crotone's reinforcements arrived near Corunna, Rockley's army ignored the fatigue of attacking Corunna and immediately launched a battle. Crotone's army did not shy away from the challenge. Therefore, the two sides engaged in a fierce battle in the suburbs north of Corunna. In terms of military strength, Rockley had the advantage, but because they had to divide part of their forces to besiege Corunna, the two sides had almost the same number of people. However, Rockley's army was mostly made up of heavy infantry and light armor, while Crotone's light infantry, which was made up of 5,000 carefully selected free people, had an obvious advantage. Because Rockley's general was worried about the impact of Crotone's heavy infantry, he thickened the formation. On the other hand, Crotone's army had learned a lot from the bitter battle with the Dionysian army due to their limited resources. After the formation was completed, they immediately sent their light infantry forward to attack. Rockley's light infantry were too few in number and were quickly defeated. Then, Crotone's light infantry began to throw javelins at Rockley's army, and Rockley's light infantry suffered a lot of casualties. Under such circumstances, Rockley's army immediately blew the horn to attack. Faced with the overwhelming charge of the heavy infantry, Crotone's light infantry did not have the strict organization and discipline of Dionia's light infantry, nor did they have experienced veterans to stabilize their morale. They also did not have excellent light infantry generals like Epitenes, Xpit, and Alpines to lead them, and they did not have the stimulation of citizenship, land, and other material rewards. Moreover, the dense formation of Crotone's heavy infantry did not have any extra space for them to retreat, so they could only flee from the battlefield in panic. As a result, many of the light infantry did not manage to escape in time and died under the charge of Rockley's heavy infantry. When they finally escaped, under the efforts of their general, the light infantry tried to regroup, but they were immediately ambushed by Rockley's cavalry and dispersed once again. However, the harassment of the light infantry had also exhausted and distracted Rockley's infantry. Now, only infantrymen were left on the battlefield. One side had just escaped from the abyss of suffering in Dionia and had not fully recovered. The other side had continuously attacked Carunia and did not have enough rest. One side had fewer soldiers, but they had the belief to wash away the humiliation and defend their territory. The other side had more soldiers, but they had suffered a blow from the light infantry, and their morale was slightly low. After fighting for nearly 2 hours, Rockley finally could not hold on any longer and retreated from the battlefield. In this battle, Crotone and Rockley suffered similar casualties, about 2,000 people, but most of Crotone's casualties were free citizens. Although Rockley was defeated, its casualties were not serious, and it withdrew from the siege of Carunia. Crotone's reinforcements successfully entered Carunia and were warmly welcomed by the people in the city, but the situation was not in Crotone's favor. Rockley's army retreated to the south of Carunia and set up camp, but they were still eyeing Carunia. Rockley's fleet cruised the sea and blocked Crotone's sea route. The pain that Dionia had suffered was now being experienced by Crotone. At this time, Ciudad Crotone had already sent out all of its elite soldiers, but Rockley still had some strength left. 2 days later, 1,000 Rockley soldiers landed on the coast between Crotone and Silatina, burning and looting along the way, and invaded Crotone's territory north. After the shock of the naval defeat, the people of Crotone heard the news of Rockley's invasion, and they panicked again. The council, on the other hand, blamed Lucius for his stubbornness, leaving the city empty and unable to send troops to repel the enemy's invasion. Lucius did not refute the council's criticism. He was also shocked by the defeat of the fleet. At this time, he could only propose that the council mobilize the whole city, and at the same time, send messengers to Dionia and Asprustum to ask for help. In this situation, Crotone actually had no other way. It was just that the war with Dionia had just ended, and the whole of Ciudad Crotone's cursing of Dionia had not disappeared. At this moment they had to beg for help again. Both the councillors and the people were a little embarrassed. Asprustum was not far from Crotone, and Sisprotus spurred on his horse and arrived at the south gate of Asprustum in less than 2 hours. Although Dionia and Crotone had made peace, Asprustum's defense did not relax. Instead, it was even tighter. There were teams of sentries patrolling back and forth on the city wall, and there were guards stationed in front of the city gate. Although there were only a few pedestrians entering and leaving the city gate, they still carried out their duties seriously. This allowed Sesprotus to patiently accept the interrogation of the guards. When the city guard captain appeared in front of him again, he brought with him the order of the governor, Helos. He was allowed to enter. As soon as he entered the city, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. The main street under his feet was not very wide, and some people were digging ditches with T-picks on both sides of the street. Some people were using hammers and awls to beat the stones piled up on the roadside, and then laid the cut stones on the dirt road. Some people were demolishing some buildings that blocked the road and building new brick walls, moving soil, stones, garbage. Countless strong men were busy, turning this place into a large construction site. Everyone was working in full swing, and almost no one stopped what they were doing to look at him. "What are they doing?" Sesprotus asked curiously. The city guard captain replied, "Because we will be moving here in the future, so we are building our own home. The roads in this city are too narrow, and the roads are uneven. Garbage and sewage are everywhere." The captain mentioned a lot of the city's shortcomings, and Sesprotus was amused. He often came to Asprustum and felt that it was no different from Tarentum. There were none of the problems mentioned by the people of Dionia. He immediately asked, "You are not Greeks, are you?" "We are Lucarians, but we are citizens of Dionia," the city guard captain said loudly. "You speak Greek well," Sesprotus praised him, and then changed the topic. "I heard that the Lucania region is full of mountains, barren land, and people often don't have enough to eat. I didn't expect you to care so much about your living environment." Chapter 240. The captain continued in a loud voice, "The engineers of the Legion often tell us, building flat roads can make it convenient for us to walk, digging ditches can take away sewage and garbage, keeping the city clean, and elevated water bridges can lead clear streams directly into the city, saving us the trouble of going back and forth to fetch water, so that we can continue to use water." Chief Executive Helos also told us that Lord Devers said, "All the facilities for the convenience of the people in Turin should be built in other cities of Dionia, so that every citizen of Dionia can enjoy a clean and convenient life, whether in Turin or in other cities." The captain's excited voice attracted the attention of some of the working soldiers. Fearing that it might cause some misunderstanding, Sesprotus did not say anything more. The captain also did not want to say anything more to this messenger of Crotone who looked down on the Lucanians. Sesprotus moved forward in silence. He even saw some people who looked like scholars measuring something with instruments at the corner of the street. It was a right-angle measuring instrument, used to measure whether the building was vertical, and some people drew lines on the side of the road with lime powder, telling the soldiers where to dig ditches. Everyone looked very focused, which touched Sesprotus somewhat. The Greeks could build solemn and magnificent temples, large-scale arenas, exquisite and sturdy theaters. They had the most advanced construction technology in the Mediterranean Sea in this era, but they would not apply it to the infrastructure to improve the lives of the people. The people were also used to the simple material life, devoting their energy to the political life, sports, competitions, and drama of the city-state. It seemed that only the people of Dionia invested a lot of manpower and material resources in the infrastructure that other Greek city-states were unwilling to do. Sesprotus had not been to the newly built Turin, but the Avenue of Dionia was quite famous in the whole of southern Italy. It seemed that even the barbarians of the Lucaria Mountains yearned for the way of life created by Dionia. There must be something attractive about it, Sesprotus thought to himself. Unknowingly, he arrived at the city hall of Asprustum and saw Helos, who had just taken office for less than 2 days, and assists, the temporary garrison officer. After listening to Sesprotus' request, Helos and the assists were a little surprised. They had just fought a bloody battle with the Crotone, and in the blink of an eye, they had become allies. The Crotone, who were once enemies, were now asking them for help, Even though these two generals had been on the battlefield for a long time, it was still difficult for them to accept it emotionally. Helos said cautiously, "Helping Crotone defend Rockley means that Dionia will declare war on Rockley. This is not a decision we can make. We need the approval of the Dionia Senate." "Of course we understand. Our other emissary has already boarded a speedboat and is rushing to Turii. However, Rockley's army has invaded our land, burning our villages and slaughtering our people. When the order from the Dionia Senate arrives, how many people in Crotone will lose their lives? How many houses will be burned down?" Thesprotus begged bitterly. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face. Dionia has always kept its promises since its establishment. As an ally of Crotone, are we just going to watch the people of Crotone suffer and do nothing? The two generals, who did not have much political experience, felt a little embarrassed. Assists tried his best to persuade Thesprotus to leave, saying that the matter was of great importance and that they needed to discuss it. Assists forced Thesprotus, who was wiping his tears, to leave. When he returned to the hall, Helos had regained his composure after some thought. "Assists, I am ready to agree to the request of the Crotone emissary. I will send troops to the west bank of the Taconati River to prevent the Rockley people from entering the core area of Crotone." "What? You are going to start a war with Rockley without the permission of the Senate? Lord Devers will be very angry." Assists recalled how Sesta made a decision on his own in Nudum and caused him to be criticized by the Devers. He immediately shook his head like a rattle drum. "No, definitely not. Who said that we must start a war with the Rockley people just because we want to stop them? We can do this." Helos carefully stated his considerations. After listening, Assists carefully thought about it and showed some concern. "Isn't this too risky? What if Rockley really attacks our troops regardless of everything? What should we do?" "Assists, you have to know that although the Dionia alliance has only been established for less than a year, our reputation in Greece is very high. Not only because of our military victories, but also because Lord Devers has always led us to adhere to our beliefs. When we were very weak, we still didn't give up on our alliance with the tourists when we were facing the threat of the powerful Crotone. Now our ally is begging us for help. If we don't help them when we can, then what will be the effect of the Defense Alliance Treaty that we have just signed with Crotone? What will the Crotone people think? When we came here, Lord Devers and the Senate warned us to maintain a peaceful and friendly relationship with Crotone. Can it be done? Will the other Greek city-states still believe that we, Dionia, can keep our promise? I know Lord Devers. In this situation, he will definitely send troops to protect Crotone without hesitation. If Rockley dares to attack, he will not hesitate to launch a counterattack." After Helos finished his speech, the assists were moved. He defended himself in a low voice. "It's not that I don't agree to send troops. I just want to get Lord Devers's instructions first. This round trip will take more than a day. By the time the order arrives, the Rockley people might have already crossed the Taconati River and caused great damage to Crotone's outskirts. Since we want to help Crotone, we must appear when they need us the most." Helos's expression was firm and his words were forceful. The assists were moved. "All right, I agree to send troops. However, we must send a messenger to Turis urgently to inform them of our decision." "That's right." Helos nodded. Thesprotus received a message from Helos. Dionia will fulfill the covenant and send troops to help Crotone defend their territory. He was so excited that he repeatedly thanked Helos and the assists. As soon as Helos made the decision to go to war, the entire assists began to move. 2,500 Legio III soldiers were quickly gathered and led by the assists. They immediately set off to the south. Helos only left 500 soldiers to guard the city. Rockley's 1,000-strong assault team did not encounter any resistance. They successfully approached the Taconati River, leaving behind a trail of ruins. If it was a few hundred years ago in the archaic era, the war between cities was still considered warm. Both sides would agree on a time and place for the battle. Before the battle, there would even be duels between warriors. The victorious side rarely pursued the enemy. But now, the war between cities was very tragic. Many of the defeated side's cities were destroyed. Therefore, when the stronger side attacked, the weaker side could only hide in the city to defend. Therefore, the attacker was unwilling to attack the city by force. Instead, they chose to destroy the farmland, burn the villages, slaughter the people, and other atrocities to force the other side to come out and fight. This was a common thing. For example, during the Peloponnesus War, Sparta attacked Athens by land. Athens knew that they could not compete with Sparta on land, so they let the people hide inside the long walls of Athens, causing the Peloponnesus to trample Attica into a desolate wilderness. These methods could also weaken the enemy's will to fight, just like what the Daionia soldiers did in the northern plains of Crotone and the Crotone soldiers in the Sabari plains. The decades of hatred between Rockley and Crotone gave the Rockley people another purpose when they did these things: to vent their anger. Therefore, they were very thorough in their actions, which slowed down the speed of their march. Hearing that the Taconati River was not far ahead, Rockley's soldiers could not wait to cross it immediately and rush into the heart of Crotone to burn, kill, and loot. When they excitedly rushed to the west bank of the Taconati River, they found that there was an army blocking their way. Diapantos was the general leading the Rockley troop. He muttered in his heart, "Didn't the navy say that Crotone had sent out all their soldiers and the city was empty? Could it be that these are the newly recruited free people?" He looked over and saw that the army in front of him was lined up neatly in a phalanx. Each of them was tall and straight, wearing helmets, breastplates, greaves, round shields, and bayonets. They were fully equipped with heavy infantry equipment. The entire phalanx was as silent as a mountain, and the oppressive aura they exuded made the people of Rockley, who had been talking and laughing loudly, fall silent. "Look at that flag." Someone pointed at a big red flag in the middle of the square formation, and exclaimed. The Rockley soldiers with good eyesight could see that there was a bronze statue of a person with wings and a sword at the top of the flag. "It looks like the Grim Reaper," someone said with uncertainty. "The Grim Reaper?" Diapantos remembered that Metlos, who had just returned to Rockley a few days ago, told the council about what he saw in Daionia. He immediately realized that the unusual army in front of them was not from Crotone, but Dioria, who had forced Crotone to sue for peace not long ago. It was a mysterious city-state alliance that did not exist a year ago, but in the blink of an eye, it had become an influential force in Greece. Diapantos immediately became nervous and hurriedly reorganized the scattered troop. At this time, a small group of cavalry came from the opposite side and stopped about 50 meters away from the Rockley troop. The general in the middle, wearing a purple helmet, spoke loudly while the other cavalrymen acted as voice transmitters. "I am Assists, the captain of the Legio III of the Daionia Alliance. Daionia and Crotone have signed an alliance defense treaty. According to the treaty, Daionia is responsible for the safety of Crotone's territory. Rockley people, Daionia has no intention of starting a war with you, but if you continue to stay in Crotone's territory, we will have no choice but to drive you away." There was a commotion in the Rockley troop. "Damn it!" Diapantos cursed in his heart. The thing he was most worried about had finally happened. Chapter 241. Some of them were already thinking of retreating. They suggested that Crotone was already enough for Rockley to handle. Now that they had an even more powerful ally, Rockley was no match for them at all. They should withdraw their troops immediately. At the same time, there were also many who objected. They thought that this was a rare opportunity to attack Crotone. Moreover, Daionia and Crotone were in a defensive alliance. They probably would not send troops to interfere. Moreover, Daionia had just ended a war. They should have suffered a lot of losses. Their hatred towards Crotone could not be erased immediately. They could not help Crotone wholeheartedly. They should seize this opportunity to attack. Both sides argued until Chief General Demodorus brought the good news that Syracuse agreed to assist. Only then did the council change their minds and agree to continue the war. When Diapantos was sent to attack Crotone's territory, the councillors of Rockley were still hoping that Dionia would not send troops. Therefore, the council did not even come to a final decision on what to do if Dionia sent troops. Now that Dionia was waiting in front, Diapantos had no idea what to do. Attack? That would mean starting a war with Dionia's alliance. As a member of the council, he understood that Rockley's decision was wishful thinking. They were too eager to defeat Crotone, and could not accept the existence of any variables. Dionia was undoubtedly the biggest variable. They could defeat Crotone, which Rockley had been unable to defeat. In addition to the triumphant scene in Thurii that Metlofinus described, Diapantos was a little afraid. If he launched an attack here and caused Dionia to join the war would escalate. Although Rockley's ally Syracuse agreed to assist, it was currently at war with Carthage. Other than providing some naval assistance, it could not provide any more help. Therefore, the councillors would definitely blame him for the final defeat of the war. But what if he did not attack? If he retreated like that, not only would it damage his reputation, but it would also damage Rockley's reputation. He would still be reprimanded when he returned. While Diapantos was hesitating, some of the soldiers started to make a ruckus. People of Dionia, don't think too highly of yourself. If you want us to retreat, we'll retreat. I'm telling you, we're not retreating. You're right. We, the Rockley people, are not to be trifled with. Locke had been in Greece for hundreds of years. What was Dionia? I've never even heard of it. We won't retreat. What can you do to us? The clamor of the soldiers made Diapantos anxious and angry. He only had a little more than 1,000 men under his command, and less than half of them were sailors. Along the way, many soldiers dragged sheep and cows and plundered a lot of resources. Their eyes were blinded by greed, and they no longer looked like soldiers. How dare they challenge the people of Dionia? Diapantos wanted to retreat, but before he could give the order, the other side had already started to beat the drums rhythmically. The stationary phalanx began to move, and the sound of footsteps was more uniform. It was like a thick iron wall pressing down on them. The soldiers of Rockley who were shouting just now immediately fell silent. Diapantos sighed and said, "Retreat!" As soon as the order was given, and before the bugle was blown, the soldiers of Rockley had already turned around and fled. The formation was completely scattered. Diapantos could not stop the soldiers from retreating in such a disorderly manner. It was as if the Grim Reaper was chasing after them. They just wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, so they left the loot on the ground. Assists did not expect to force the people of Rockley to retreat so easily. He sent a small number of soldiers to clean up the battlefield and led the army to follow behind the people of Rockley. When he saw the people of Crotone scrambling to board the ships and sail away from the coast, he led the soldiers back and returned all the loot to the people of Crotone, who came to express their gratitude. This made the people of Crotone even more grateful and ashamed. Of course, Diapantos was not willing to return to Rockley just like that. After the fleet sailed south for a while, he led the troops to land on the coast of Syrium, which was not yet an ally of Dionia. In the city of Sparta, there was a building that occupied a large area. Simple stone pillars propped up the roof to shelter the building from the wind and rain. 3 sides of the building were ventilated, and one side was the kitchen. The spacious hall was filled with long wooden tables and chairs. This was the canteen of the citizens of Sparta. When it was time to eat, the people of Sparta gathered here from all directions. They queued up to receive their communal meal, and then ate in the canteen, which could accommodate 500 people at the same time. On sunny days, the tables were even placed on the grass. Thousands of citizens of Sparta, regardless of age or rank, ate together. Everyone ate roughly the same food. This not only reflected the equality of the citizens of Sparta, but also emphasized their unity. The people of Sparta, who emphasized discipline and obedience, always kept this grand dining scene orderly. This was the communal meal system that Sparta was famous for in Greece. The food they received was not free. Instead, it was produced from the land allocated to the citizens by the city-state. The citizens had to pay to the city-state before they could enjoy the communal meal. Although it was said that the land was the citizens' own, in fact, the citizens themselves did not have the right to use it. The land was managed by the city-state, and the helots worked hard to cultivate it. Once the citizens lost their land and were unable to pay, they would lose the right to participate in the communal meal. Thus, they would become the marginalized people of the city-state, i.e., the Paliasai. Therefore, the communal meal system created by the people of Sparta was not only a dining system, but also an important political activity. It was also the authentication of the identity of the Sparta citizens. Since the Peloponnesus War, it was difficult for the Sparta cafeteria to recreate the spectacular scene of thousands of people eating together. The citizens had been fighting wars for a long time, and they were accompanied by death. The number of people eating here at one time had never exceeded 500. Even after the war was won, the number did not recover. This was because Sparta's fleet was patrolling the Aegean Sea. Some of the cities conquered by Sparta needed the loyalty of the Sparta garrison. Although most of the soldiers were mercenaries, Paliasai, and helots, the authentic citizens of Sparta had to serve as commanders and high-ranking officers. On this day, there were only about 100 Sparta citizens eating in the cafeteria. Phoebidas sat at the dining table, chewing the bread in his hand. He thought back to the ascension of the new king not long ago. Agesilaus became the king, which was unexpected to many people. However, he was happy because Agesilaus had several in-depth contacts with him. He thought that Agesilaus was a kind and wise man, and would be a good king. "Hey, look! There are 2 damn helots over there!" A man at the table next to him suddenly shouted. Following the direction of his finger, Phoebidas saw the 2 men who were eating at the table opposite him. Their expressions immediately became a little unnatural. Although they were also bare-chested, no matter in terms of body shape or skin color, they were different from the real Sparta citizens. Those are the new citizens. To be able to enjoy a communal meal, it means that they have earned enough merits in the war to move the conservative old men in the council. They were granted freedom and citizenship, and they were even given land. This is not easy. We should respect true warriors. The other man said in a gentle tone. Humph, who knows if it was Lysander's doing? During the war, he used the excuse of defeating the Athens war to use his power to turn many Paliasai people and a few helots into Sparta citizens. The man lowered his voice and said angrily, "No matter how brave the people of Sparta are, we can't withstand the casualties caused by frequent battles. Without these new citizens, we couldn't have won the war against the Athens war. But look at how many people here are real Sparta citizens, and a few of my comrades temporarily lost their citizenship because they couldn't pay for their communal meals. They were reduced to low-class people. If this continues, will Sparta still be Sparta?" You are right. Let me tell you, The man leaned close to his companion and whispered something. The people of Sparta had always been quiet, especially during meals. Not only was this citizen talkative, but he was also whispering to each other. It was difficult not to attract Phoebidas's attention. Just when he turned his head to see who the person was, someone patted his shoulder lightly. "Phoebidas, King Agesilaus is asking for you." "Okay." Phoebidas immediately stuffed the last bit of bread into his mouth, and finished the oatmeal in one gulp. He wiped his mouth, stood up, and followed the guard to the front of the cafeteria. He subconsciously looked back at the man just now. He had already finished his meal and left the cafeteria. He could only see his back view. Phoebidas shook his head and dispelled the trace of doubt in his heart. He walked to the new king of Sparta. The current Agesilaus was different from before. He was calmer and more dignified. Phoebidas bowed respectfully. "Sit down, Phoebidas." Agesilaus looked at him with a smile. "We are old friends. You don't have to be so polite." Phoebidas listened and no longer acted humble. He sat opposite Agesilaus. "Are you full? If it's not enough, I have more here," Agesilaus said as he pushed a plate over. The king of Sparta also had to participate in the communal meal. The food was no different from other citizens. The only privilege was that he could receive 2 portions of the communal meal. It wasn't that the king had to eat more. Instead, the king of Sparta could use the extra portion to invite others to eat with him. It didn't have to be a citizen of Sparta, it could even be a foreigner. The last king, Agis, had entertained Alcibiades in this way. Chapter 242. Phoebidas gladly accepted. He happened to be a little hungry, so he picked up another piece of bread, smeared it with honey, and chewed on it. Agesilaus waited patiently for him to finish eating before saying, "Can you tell me the details of your last diplomatic mission to Greece?" Phoebidas was excited. When he returned and reported to the elder council, the elders were busy with the funeral and electing a new king because King Agis had passed away. They did not care about anything else. Just as Phoebidas briefly described his diplomatic mission to Greece, the new king of Sparta expressed his concern for Dionia. Phoebidas immediately recounted the details of his diplomatic mission to Dionia without any exaggeration. Agesilaus supported his head with one hand and straightened his limping leg. He listened attentively and pondered at the same time. When Phoebidas finished, he said, "It seems like Dionia gave you a hard time. You don't have a good impression of them." "I'm angry because Dionia lacks due respect for Sparta, but personally." Phoebidas paused for a moment and revealed a strange expression. He said honestly, "Actually, I rather admire Dionia." "Oh?" Agesilaus was a little surprised. "Why?" "Perhaps it's because of the toughness they displayed." Phoebidas recalled the situation at that time and sighed. "Although I only stayed in Thurii for a short while in a hurry and did not have deep contact with the citizens of Dionia, I felt that the soldiers of Dionia were also very disciplined. I even heard that the Senate of Dionia even held a celebration ceremony for the generals and soldiers who returned from a victory. The feeling I felt. Phoebidas pondered and suddenly said, "Dionia is like Sparta in Greece." Agesi was taken aback for a moment, then he joked, "I can't believe you compared a city-state union ruled by a tyrant to Sparta, where our citizens are equal and free. Although there's only one consul in Dionia, and it's a lifetime appointment, they still have a senate. Based on my experience in the Senate of Dionia, those senators seem to be able to influence the laws of Dionia. The relationship between the consul and the senators in the Senate. How should I put this? Unlike Syracuse, where Dionysius has the final say," Phoebidas said seriously. "You don't seem to have a good impression of Syracuse," Agesilaus said, glancing at him. "I think anyone who hears that Syracuse is able to mobilize such a huge force to attack Carthage wouldn't be in a good mood." Phoebidas said straightforwardly, "The tens of thousands of infantrymen are nothing. The key is that he has thousands of cavalrymen and a huge fleet that isn't any weaker than ours. Dionysius is an ambitious man." Agesilaus looked at him and smiled. "Phoebidas, I'm glad that you can see this. We only began to pay attention to the West during the later stages of the war with Athens. It was through the alliance with Syracuse that Sparta was able to intervene in the affairs of the West. Carthage is Persia's ally in the Western Mediterranean. We need an ally in the Western Mediterranean to suppress Carthage and protect the safety of Sparta's rear. This is why we support Syracuse. At the same time, Sparta's influence in the Greek forces in the West has gradually deepened. However, some of Sparta's actions in the past have been allowing Syracuse to expand and swallow the Greek forces in Sicily. I'm afraid that in the end it will cause trouble for us. We don't want our ally to be too weak, but we can't let it be too strong either. Honorable King Agesilaus, you're right. But now, Carthage still has the advantage in Sicily while Sparta's forces are all concentrated in Asia Minor. At this time, we should continue to support Syracuse for the time being. Phoebidas understood the hidden meaning behind Agesilaus' words, but he still fought for the sake of the city, and spoke frankly. We don't need to do anything. The power to suppress Syracuse's expansion has already appeared. Agesilaus wasn't unhappy. Instead, he smiled at him in relief. It's the Dionia that made you unhappy before. Dionia? Phoebidas was surprised at first, then he shook his head. It can't be compared to Syracuse at all. Syracuse is much stronger in terms of territory, population, trade, and military strength. That's true for now, but Dionia is expanding very quickly. Agesilaus said with a complicated expression. I just received news from Greece. Dionia defeated Crotone and forced Crotone to cede territory and sign an alliance treaty. When did that happen? Phoebidas's eyes widened. Not long after he left Greece, Dionia defeated Crotone again? Phoebidas was in disbelief. Crotone is obviously stronger than Dionia. And this time, Crotone shouldn't make the same mistake as last time. How, 100 years ago, before Sybaris and Crotone fought, many Greek city-states thought so too, but the weak Crotone won in the end. Agesilaus sighed. Kelessops was right. Devers is a military genius. Although Sparta regrettably missed out on him, it's not a bad idea to let him lead Dionia against Syracuse. Will Dionia and Syracuse definitely clash? Phoebidas was still thinking about how Dionia defeated Crotone, and was a little absent-minded. Therefore, he did not pay much attention to his reply and sounded very doubtful. Agesilaus did not mind and said, Now that Syracuse has occupied the eastern part of Sicily, with our support and their accumulated strength, it's not too difficult to chase Carthage's forces out of Sicily. It's even possible to completely drive Carthage out of Sicily. Even if they can't do that, Syracuse will definitely become the leader of the Greek city-states in Sicily. Like you said, Dionysius is an ambitious person. Will he be satisfied with that? As Agesilaus spoke, he dipped his finger into the oatmeal and drew a simple map of Sicily on the table. Phoebidas shook his head. Will he lead troops into Africa? Agesilaus asked. Phoebidas shook his head with all his might. What a joke. That was Carthage's headquarters. It had been in operation for hundreds of years. If Syracuse dared to send troops into Africa, Carthage would definitely not let them return, just like the army led by Dorius, the brother of Sparta who was exiled by King Cleomenes 100 years ago. Then the only place where Syracuse can expand its power is here. Agesilaus drew a rough outline of Sicily. Great Greece. It's only separated from Sicily by a narrow strait, and they're both Greek city-states. Dionysius has always been cruel to his Greek compatriots. You're right. Phoebidas nodded in agreement. He and Agesilaus had never thought about the Greek mainland to the east of Sicily. They thought that no matter how bold Dionysius was, he would not dare to offend the powerful states with a long history in the Greek mainland. Dionia has now subdued Crotone. Further south from Crotone, the only powerful city-states left are Rockley and Lygum. Rockley and Syracuse are allies and Crotone are archenemies. Crotone is now in an alliance with Dionia. Therefore, it's only a matter of time before Dionia and Syracuse come into conflict. Agesilaus analyzed. Phoebidas stared at the table and shook his head. Dionia is still too weak. As long as Dionysius's army sets foot on the land of Great Greece, other than the Rockley Alliance and Tarentum, I'm afraid the other city-states will unite around Dionia, Agesilaus said solemnly. We don't want another Syracuse to appear in the western Mediterranean, but as long as Dionia can create enough trouble for Syracuse, I believe that Devers will definitely be able to do it and prevent Dionysius from conquering Great Greece in a short period of time. Then, it's time for us, Sparta, to mediate. Don't forget, there's still Tarentum in Great Greece, which is a friendly state to us, Sparta. Phoebidas recalled his encounter in Tarentum and curled his lips. Tarentum might not necessarily listen to us. When Ionia and Syracuse are strong, they will listen. Agesilaus sneered and extended 3 fingers to support himself on the table. Syracuse, Ionia, and Tarentum are the 3 important city-states that maintain the stability of the Western Mediterranean. This is the result that the Elder Council came up with after learning that Syracuse's army attacked western Sicily and Ionia defeated Crotone. So, don't worry about Ionia anymore. Honorable King Agesilaus, I understand. Phoebidas understood that the indifferent old men in the Elder Council would not care about the conflict in a young general's heart, and Agesilaus had specially come to comfort him. Phoebidas was extremely grateful for this. Agesilaus smiled faintly as though it was a piece of cake. He then said, I called you here for another matter. Phoebidas immediately leaned forward with a serious expression. Chapter 243. Supervising the implementation of the peace treaty, ceding land, and the resettlement of immigrants in the city of Elis has been temporarily put on hold due to the passing of Arsus. I've recommended you to the council. Are you willing to go? Agesilaus said with a straight face. I'm willing. Phoebidas blurted out. During this period of time, he had nothing to do other than military training and attending the king's funeral. He could not help but feel disappointed as he watched others being sent overseas to carry out important missions one by one. Now, Agesilaus had placed such a lucrative job in front of him. How could he not be moved and grateful? Thank you, King Agesilaus, for your trust in me. You becoming our king is a gift from Zeus to Sparta. Agesilaus smiled when he heard Phoebidas, one of the talented younger generation of Sparta, flattering him. After Agesilaus and Phoebidas left, there were only a few dozen people in the canteen. A young man with a linen draped over his head sneaked out from behind a pillar. He looked at Agesilaus back with hatred. He hurriedly went to get his meal. The chef who distributed the food joked, Leotychides, why are you dressed like this? You look like a woman. A Periasian dared to make fun of him. If it was before, Leotychides would have beaten him up or even chopped off his arms and legs. But now, the former king's son did not have the mood to argue. He found a corner, sat down, and munched on his bread. For some reason, tears welled up in his eyes. His failure in the election for the throne had made him a joke in Sparta. His uncle, who usurped the throne, gave half of his father's inheritance to his people who were living in hardship, thus gaining the support of the royal family. While the people praised Agesilaus' benevolence, some people suggested to chase him and his mother out of Sparta. The reason was that he and his mother are not Sparta, but have become a disgrace to Sparta. Although the Elder Council refuted this absurd suggestion, the Sparta people looked at Leotychides with even more contempt. What did I do wrong? Why is the goddess of fate punishing me like this? In order to prove myself, I participated in the Agog, the cruel military training that Sparta boys undergo from a young age, which the heirs of kings did not have to participate in. I always performed well in every training. I always fought at the forefront of every battle. My debates always left my peers speechless. My essays were better than theirs. But why? Why? They can't see this, but they always use these rumors to humiliate me and my mother. Damn you, Agesilaus. Damn the Elder Council. Damn it. Arches, if you didn't mistreat mother, how could there be so many rumors? In the end, Leotychides began to blame his dead father. I can't stand such humiliation anymore. I want to take my mother away from this disgusting place. I want to leave Sparta. Leotychides finally made up his mind. His footsteps became vigorous again. When he was about to reach his destination, he saw many people gathered in front of his house. All of them shook their heads and sighed. Their expressions were solemn, and a sense of unease rose in his heart. Leotychides, a clansman who was usually on good terms with him, saw him and said sadly, "Your mother committed suicide. Diapanto's army ravaged the Silic-Guardian territory. The Silic-Guardian garrison was forced to leave the city to face the enemy, and the Rockley people retreated early. On the second day, the Rockley people appeared again. When the Silic-Guardian garrison chased them to the coast like yesterday, they found nearly 2,000 Rockley soldiers waiting for them in battle. The disorganized Silic-Guardian garrison quickly retreated. Under the pursuit of the Rockley cavalry, the Silic-Guardians paid the price of a few hundred casualties. They hid in the city and did not come out. They sent people to Corunna's Crotone army for help. As the leader of the alliance, Crotone had no choice but to send 3,000 people to help Silic-Guardian. However, the Rockley people retreated by sea again. Just as the Crotone army was hesitating whether to stay in Silic-Guardian or return to Corunna, the 3,000 Rockley, Medma, and Hibernian army marched along the west coast, crossed the Lala River, and entered Trine territory. The Trine people who had learned their lesson from Silic-Guardian did not dare to act rashly. Instead, they asked for help from Crotone. Not long after the Crotone army left Silic-Guardian and entered Trine, the Rockley people landed on the coast of Silic-Guardian. The Crotone army was mobilized back and forth, but they could not touch a single hair of the Rockley people. They had nowhere to vent their anger. Silic-Guardian and Trine people were also suffering. The newly sown farmlands were destroyed, and the people's war-weariness grew. At this time, the Crotone people finally realized that the 20 warships that suddenly appeared at sea were not secretly built by Rockley in the past year. They were Syracuse's help. This news caused the Crotone emissaries to panic. During this period of time, the Devers who returned to Thurii, apart from dealing with the alliance's affairs, stayed at home to accompany their wives, take care of their newborn children, and educate their adopted children. Their days were quite fulfilling and happy. Even when the Crotone emissaries came to Thurii and asked for help from Dionia, they did not cause any anxiety. This was because Helos and assists quickly forced the Rockley people who invaded Crotone's territory to retreat. For this, the Senate elders praised the Devers for choosing the right chief executive of Asplustum. In their letters to Helos and assists, the Devers praised them for their decisiveness in taking the right measures in such a complicated situation. They also encouraged them to act boldly in times of crisis. They did not care too much about their own feelings and wait for the Senate's orders. The outstanding performance of Helos and assists also made the Devers completely relieved. They put more energy into the resettlement work of Asplustum and Cremissa. But at this time, he received the news from Aristyras that the Crotone emissaries, the Cyrodian emissaries, the Trina emissaries, and the Coronese emissaries had come north together. Linking this to the report that Aristyras had given him about the battle between Crotone and Rockley, the purpose of these emissaries coming to Thurii was obvious. The first thought that came to the Devers' mind was that this was a rare opportunity to expand the strength and influence of Dionia. In comparison, fighting with Rockley was not unacceptable. But then he began to hesitate. Thanks to Aristyras from Catanai's special attention on Syracuse, he also knew the truth of Crotone's defeat in the naval battle. Syracuse was a true ally of Rockley, and they had also sent reinforcements in this war. If the Devers fought with Rockley, they would inevitably offend Syracuse. Was it worth it? The Devers had to consider this carefully. In his previous life, he did not know much about the history of Syracuse. He only knew that Archimedes and Syracuse were one of the culprits that triggered the First Carthage War. The people of Rome easily crushed Syracuse as if Syracuse's strength was not worth mentioning. However, it was the people of Rome who used the power of the whole of Italy to attack Syracuse, which was in the period of decline. When the Devers traveled to this era in the Mediterranean world, in Magna Graecia, He felt that the Greek city-states of Italy were in awe of Syracuse, the big city of Sicily. A few decades ago, Syracuse defeated Carthage and dominated Sicily and Magna Graecia. Now, it seemed to have begun to restore its former glory and had a tendency to unify the Greek city-states in Sicily. Although Sicily was just an island, its land was fertile, and it was a famous wheat producer in the western Mediterranean, mainly because of volcanic ash. Moreover, the Greeks had colonized a large number of Sicily and developed Sicily very early. In addition, Sicily was located near the center of the Mediterranean Sea and became an important hub for trade and commerce in the eastern and western Mediterranean Sea. Therefore, Sicily's commerce and agriculture were relatively developed. Judging by the fact that Syracuse was able to organize such a large army just by occupying the southeastern part of Sicily, one could imagine the huge potential of war. This was not something that Daionia, which was still in its infancy, could compare to. However, the Devers was not a frog in a well. He was so ignorant that he could not see the potential danger. On the contrary, the history of his previous life was filled with countless examples, political, economic, geographical theories. No matter how Daionia tried to hide, once Syracuse defeated Carthage and unified the Greek city-states in Sicily, the rapidly rising Daionia would inevitably attract its attention and become an obstacle to its expansion. It might even become its next target. Therefore, it was better to seize the opportunity when Syracuse was in the quagmire of war with Carthage to strengthen itself so that it would have the strength to fight against Syracuse in the future. Therefore, after careful consideration, the Devers finally made a decision and convinced the Senate. Sesprotus was the envoy of Crotone. Because he had accompanied Lysias to successfully reach a truce with Daionia and sign an alliance treaty, and then he had single-handedly persuaded the garrison of Daionia in Asplutium to send troops to help Crotone and force the Locrians to retreat, almost everyone in the Crotone council, except for Lysias, unanimously elected him to be the envoy of Daionia. This was the first time he was so highly regarded by the Crotone senators. Furthermore, the envoys of the other three city-states had followed his lead along the way. It was inevitable that Sesprotus felt a little complacent. Chapter 244. The flat and wide streets, the neatly divided blocks, the neatly arranged houses, all of these made one feel the importance that the people of Daionia placed on cleanliness and order. The tall water bridges that spanned across the city, the gigantic water wheels that slowly turned, the uniquely shaped fountains, and the gurgling water on both sides of the roads, all of these showed that the people of Daionia, as Greeks, had their own unique characteristics and pursuits in the art of architecture and technology. The things that made the emissaries pause the most were the white and towering triumphal arch, the majestic Victory Square, and the majestic Senate Hall. These were obviously displaying the ambitions and pursuits of Daionia. If they saw these things in the past, they might have secretly mocked Daionia for overestimating himself. However, after experiencing the Second Crotone War, they had no choice but to take this city-state alliance seriously. They could clearly see that from the moment this new city was built, it had shown itself to be different from the other Greek city-states, as well as its extraordinary ambitions. Not to mention, just looking at the Temple of Hades that was about to be completed on the hill in the distance, Daionia was the only city in all of Greece that had Hades as the guardian of the city. Just as the emissaries were carefully observing the center of this new city-state alliance while heading west towards the Senate, the people of Turin had left their houses and were heading east in high spirits. I heard them saying something about distributing land? The emissary of Silatina asked curiously. Yes, I heard it too. The emissary of Telaina asked more directly, are you going to distribute the newly occupied land to the citizens? Everyone. The land that Daionia did not forcibly occupy was obtained legally according to the covenant. Plesinas, who came to greet them, immediately corrected them with a serious expression. The emissaries did not refute, but they were cursing in their hearts. According to the military law of Dionia, the citizenship law of Dionia, and the promise made by the Senate before the war, all citizens and prospective citizens who participated in this war will be given land. Plesinas continued without hiding anything, according to the merits of the militia in the war and the actual situation of the land in the northern plains of Esporstum, Crimissa, and Croton. During this time, the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Military Affairs under the Senate have done a lot of work. Today is the announcement of the results of land distribution. Not only the people of Tulii, but the people of Amendolara and Nudum will also come. Because there are too many people, it can only be held outside the city. If the emissaries are interested, you can go and have a look after the meeting. Let's hurry to the Senate and get things done. The citizens of our city are still waiting for our news. Seeing that the other emissaries were tempted, Sesprotus reminded them loudly, taking the opportunity to hide his embarrassment. After all, the land that Dionia distributed was the land that Crotone was forced to cede. Sesprotus knew that this trip would not be as easy as the previous one, but he did not expect that in the face of the request of the 4 emissaries, all the senators of the Senate of Dionia were adamant in their opposition to sending troops. The war has just ended, and Dionia has suffered great losses. They do not have enough money and food to deal with another war. The citizens of Dionia have just put down their shields and spears, and they have just been allocated land. They are all ready to take a good rest and plant wheat on the newly allocated land before the end of spring. They can still catch up with the harvest, so there is no desire to fight. There is no need for Dionia to become enemies with Rockley, and thus provoke the powerful city of Syracuse. In short, all these words could be summed up in one sentence. Dionia only wanted to rest and did not want to meddle in other people's business. Therefore, the emissaries of Silatina, Trine, and Corunna expressed their willingness to sign the defense alliance treaty with Dionia, just like Crotone. However, they were strongly opposed by the senators of Dionia. Their reason was simple: with the current strength of Dionia, almost no force in southern Italy dared to provoke them. On the other hand, Corunna, Trine, and Silatina were attacked from time to time by Rockley and Brudi. If they signed the treaty, it would be equivalent to these 3 city-states hiring a powerful alliance of city-states for free to protect their safety. This was obviously beneficial to them, but not to Dionia. The negotiations in the Senate reached an impasse. Sesprotus was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. At this time, the Trine emissary said eagerly, "What if I request to join the alliance of Dionia?" The Trine emissary did not come on a whim. When they passed by Castellan, Amicals and the others had treated them with great hospitality. During the banquet, the senators of Castellan mentioned the many benefits that Castellan had obtained after joining the alliance of Dionia. At the same time, they had seen the stability and prosperity of the people in Castellan with their own eyes, and this had touched the emissaries. When Sesprotus heard this, he was shocked and subconsciously shouted, "Sesprotus, do you know what you are talking about? To save Trine." The emissary, Sesprotus, said righteously, "We, the people of Trine, have always abided by the covenant in the alliance, responding to the call of Crotone, paying tribute on time every year, and in every war, we have actively sent troops and food. Now, in exchange, the people of Rockley have wantonly destroyed the territory of Trine. Trine is a small city-state, living in the gap between Hibernian, a city-state in the Rockley alliance, south of Trine, and the Brudi. If we do not defeat Rockley as soon as possible and the Brudi attack, I am afraid that the people of Turilla will starve to death." Sesprotus wanted to say that if Trine ran out of food, Crotone could help. But he immediately swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Crotone had experienced 2 wars with Dionia and suffered heavy losses. Because of the blockade by the fleet of Rockley, the people in the city were also facing a food shortage. This was the main reason why Crotone was so eager to agree to their 3 allies to ask for help from Dionia. He warned loudly, Don't you know that after joining the alliance of Dionia, you can no longer have any alliance relationship with other city-states? If Trine leaves the alliance of Crotone, then Crotone will immediately retreat the troops of Crotone who are defending Trine. In the future, if the enemy invades, we will not give any help to Trine. Sesprotus' words were not only directed at Trine, but also to the emissaries of Syracuse and Corunna, and even the Senate of Dionia. After all, the main force to resist Rockley in the south was Crotone. If it refused to help, not only would the other city-states be in big trouble, it would also be a hindrance to Dionia's plan. Because of that, the emissaries of Syracuse and Corunna, who originally had some thoughts, kept their mouths shut. The emissary of Trine, Cypros, was also in a difficult position. Seeing this situation, the Devers said slowly, "Emissaries from the city-states of Crotone, if Dionia agrees to your request and sends troops to repel Rockley, then Rockley and even Syracuse will most likely focus their anger on Dionia. Any rational citizen of Dionia will not allow us to make such a foolish decision to help you, which is completely detrimental to the interests of our alliance." The emissary's expressions darkened at the words of the Devers. The Devers then changed the topic. "But as you have said just now, whether it is Dionia, Crotone, or Syracuse, conflicts of interests, or even wars, are ultimately a matter between the Greek city-states. However, colluding with Syracuse of Sicily and intervening in the war between the Greek city-states like Rockley is undoubtedly attracting a hungry wolf to a flock of sheep, threatening the safety of the entire Greek city-states. We must end the war with Rockley as soon as possible while Syracuse is busy fighting Carthage, not giving Syracuse an excuse to interfere. Therefore, whether to send troops or not, the Senate of Dionia is in a difficult position. The citizens need a good reason to let them, who yearn for stability, feel that they are not fighting a meaningless battle for an outsider. Dionia also does not want to be abandoned after helping you, and face a strong enemy alone in the future." The emissaries fell into silence. The meaning of the Devers' words was already very clear. However, Sesprotus was distraught. He remembered the warning of Lucius before he left. Dionia may not want the large amount of gold, silver, and materials promised by the city-states to force it to send troops, and it may not sign a defense alliance treaty with the city-states. They may want more. At this time, the Devers spoke again in a clear voice. "I have a proposal for you to consider." At the moment when he paused, every emissary pricked up their ears. The 5 city-states of Dionia, Crotone, Syracuse, Corunna, and Trine shall form an alliance together to resist and attack the enemies who dare to invade us. The alliance shall not invade each other, and if there are any conflicts, they can be resolved through negotiation. Hearing this, the emissaries all looked as if they had expected it, but the expression on Sesprotus' face deepened. The others were obviously a little tempted, especially the Trine emissary, Cypros, who became lively again and rushed to ask, "May I ask, Lord Consul, who will be the leader of this alliance?" As soon as this question was asked, Sesprotus suddenly became nervous. The Devers smiled slightly. Regardless of the size of the alliance shall be equal. When there are problems and it is difficult to reach an agreement, each city-state can vote to solve it. Chapter 245. The original Crotone alliance relied on Crotone in both foreign affairs and wars. The other city-states had to pay tribute every year. Of course, Crotone did contribute a lot to the alliance's safety in defending against foreign enemies. However, with Crotone's power, it often made decisions without consulting the alliance, and the other alliances had to provide support for it, just like the declaration of war with Dionia. If they followed the Devers' suggestion, the opinions of the smaller alliances could be valued in the new alliance. This was a good thing for Trine, Corunna, and Silatina. "I agree with the consul's suggestion. Let's establish such an alliance among our city-states. This way we can unite the city-states in southern Italy, protect our interests, and prevent our enemies from easily offending us." The Trine envoy, Cypros, expressed his support first. Then, the Silatina envoy agreed with this suggestion. Because their homeland was being protected by the Crotone army, the Corunna envoy only expressed his approval in a vague way. Therefore, everyone's eyes were focused on Sethpros. Sethpros was already in a mess. He knew that as long as he nodded, the new alliance would be established, and the Crotone alliance would no longer exist. Crotone's century-old hegemony in southern Italy would also come to an end. In fact, after the Second Crotone War, the power of Crotone had already declined. It was only the Crotone alliance that comforted the people. Thesprotus did not dare to take on such a big responsibility and become the scapegoat of the people's insults. Therefore, he stammered, "This matter? I can't make the decision. It has to be discussed and decided by the council." The other envoys were disappointed by his delay, but the Devers said calmly, "It's okay, we can wait." Negotiations could wait, but the war would not stop. In the middle of February, Syracuse's army easily occupied Agrigento, which was the second largest Greek city-state in Sicily. A few days later, Rockley's army, which had received a small amount of reinforcements from the kingdom, left the camp and marched toward Corunna city. Even though there were still more than 2,000 Crotone reinforcements left in the Siletan territory, the Crotone army resolutely joined forces with the Corunna army and marched out of the city to meet the enemy. After the battle lasted for an hour, Rockley started to gain the upper hand with the advantage in numbers. If it weren't for the wind that coincidentally blew and prevented the Rockley cavalry from pursuing, the allied army of Crotone and Corunna would have suffered more than a small setback. When Turin was rebuilt, every senator of the Senate was allocated a residence. Cunegurata had purposely chosen a courtyard that was far away from his former residence to avoid being reminded of the past. That night, when he returned home, the living room was still lit by candlelight. His eldest son, Sostatus, came out to welcome him. "Father, you're really late today. Did something troublesome happen in the city again?" Cunegurata glanced at him and took off his sweaty bolton. He stood in the courtyard and asked a male slave to bring water to clean his body. Then he said, "Antares and the others of Cremissa have come to the Senate to report. I'm busy with their household registration, the allocation of residences, and a lot of other things today. You don't need to do these things yourself. Just let your subordinates do it." "What do you know? Considering that Cremissa has just joined the alliance, we need to use actions to show that Dionia values the senators who represent the people of Cremissa and dispel their worries." Sostatus leaned against the pillar and said disapprovingly, "It's another request from the Devers, isn't it? Damn you!" Cunegurata grabbed the wet cloth in the slave's hand and threw it at Sostatus. He yelled, "How many times have I told you not to disrespect the Archon? You never listen." "How have I disrespected the Archon?" Sostatus yelled as he picked up the wet cloth and carefully threw it to the slave. "The Devers are my commander. I've always followed military law and listened to orders. However, this is how I speak. I can't change it." Cunegurata looked at his son's lazy expression even when he was seriously rebuking him. He couldn't help but sigh. This son of his really isn't cut out for politics. Thinking of this, he asked, "Why aren't you sleeping and waiting for me here? Are you thinking of borrowing money from me again?" "You're underestimating me, father. The last time I borrowed money from you, I contracted the warehouse and hotel in Amendola. Other than repaying you and paying the rent, guess how much money I earned?" Sostatus asked proudly. Cunegurata ignored him. 1 talent and 20 minas. Sostatus wagged his finger and said proudly, "If it wasn't for the war with Crotone and the blockade of the port of Thurii, I could have earned even more." He paused and said, "Father, I have something to discuss with you. Go ahead." Cunegurata knew that his father had something to say, so he pretended to be indifferent. Sostatus looked at his father and said carefully, "After this war, the Union will give you and me a total of 4 acres of land in the northern plains of Croton. I want to use it to exchange for land in Amendola." What? You want to use the fertile land of Croton to exchange for the barren land of Amendola? Even though Cunagharata didn't care about money, he had to be careful when it came to land. Land was the lifeblood of the Greek. Father, listen to me, Sostatus said hurriedly. Cunagharata knew that his son must have a reason for saying that, so he cleaned himself and changed into clean clothes. He sat in the living room and listened to his son carefully. Father, you are the governor of Thurii. You should know that the port's trade has been increasing since the reconstruction of Thurii last year. Cunagharata snorted at Sostatus' words. How could he not know? He could even tell the number of cargo ships that entered and left Thurii every month and the amount of trade taxes. Marigi had made a detailed plan to revitalize the union's trade, and he had put in a lot of effort to realize it. Why can I earn money? It's because Thurii's port can't accommodate so many goods and foreigners anymore. That's why the warehouses and hotels under Amendola are so popular. Now that we've defeated Crotone, not only have we expanded our territory again, but we've also become the strongest nation in southern Italy. Merchants and freedmen will flock here, but the Senate has made a law that forbids the use of the fertile land of Sabari Plain for other purposes. Otherwise, the land will be taken back. Yes, Berks is in charge of this. It's also to protect the arable land of Thurii, Cunagharata interrupted. I think this is the right thing to do. Sostatus flattered him before saying, this way, Amendola has become the inevitable choice for these foreign merchants and freedmen. The industrial area that Marigi started last year has been auctioned off. I went to take a look a few days ago. There's already a weapons workshop, a pottery workshop, and a stone carving shop. These are all large-scale workshops that require a lot of labor and slave. Hence, there's a huge demand for lodging, food, and entertainment. I've discussed it with others before. 4 acres of land in Crotone Plain can be exchanged for 8 acres of land in Amendola, near the industrial area. With such a large piece of land, I can build a large number of cheap houses and warehouses. The annual rent alone will not be a small amount. I can also build some small shops and rent them out as bakeries and clothing shops. When I have money in the future, I can even buy many slaves and rent them out for profit. Sostatus gushed about his dream. Father, no matter how fertile the land is, it'll still suffer heavy losses in a disaster year. According to my plan, as long as the Dionia alliance remains strong, our family's annual income will be much greater than farming. Cunagharata looked at his son's high-spirited face and thought for a long time. He said, Sostatus, you'll be in charge of the family's finances from now on. I'll announce this at home tomorrow and have Croesus, Cunagharata's slave butler, listen to your arrangements. Really? Sostatus could not believe his ears. Of course. Since you have the talent for business, I won't let you bury it. But, Cunagharata said, after I die, you'll have to give half of the assets you earned to your brother. Can you agree to that? Under Cunagharata's gaze, Sostatus calmed down. He thought about it carefully and said solemnly, ever since our family was chased out of Thurii and my sister Safina left us, it made me feel that I need to cherish my family even more. Dikacortex is my only brother. Father, I'll sign an agreement according to Nee's request. When you go to Elysee, I'll give him half of the family's assets. And my sister, when she remarries, I'll prepare a rich dowry for her. Very good. Very good. Cunagharata was relieved. He felt that he had made the right decision. Sostatus's words reminded him of another worry. Chapter 246. Fortunately, not long after Crotone burned the city and the Devers led the army to recover Turin, Diana returned home. However, she was always depressed. She was now 23 years old. As a father, Cunagharata wanted his children to be happy, so he wanted to find a good husband for her. It had become a worry for him. Sostatus, what do you think of Helos? Cunagharata suddenly asked. What do you mean? Sostatus wondered why his father suddenly mentioned him. If he becomes your brother-in-law, you want to choose Helos to be Diana's husband? Sostatus' eyes widened in shock. When he saw his father nodding seriously, he quickly came up with a joke. He thought carefully and said, "Although I'm a soldier under his command, he's a captain. I don't have much contact with him. I only know that although he's trained strictly, he's fair and loves us. I heard that he's still single and doesn't have any bad habits. If my sister marries him, she should be well taken care of." But father, why did you choose him? It seems that none of the Turan senators are willing to marry their daughter to a senator who used to be a mercenary. These people are still immersed in the glory of their families. They are still hesitant to accept the change in Turan. Cunegurata sneered and said solemnly, "Why should I ask you to show respect to His Excellency the Consul? Because he's indeed favored by the gods. He's so young, but he's so capable and resourceful. The people love him, the army supports him, and the Senate is completely under his control. If I don't want the tragedy of my family to repeat itself, becoming a relative of the former mercenary senators who followed him to Persia is undoubtedly the best way. I heard that Helos used to be the captain of His Excellency, the consul in Persia, and took good care of him. Although Helos has always kept a low profile in the Senate, I can see that His Excellency the consul trusts him a lot. Besides, although he used to be a mercenary, I heard from Cornelis that he's humble and steady. He's also good at learning from others. I believe he'll have a stable career in Dionia's politics in the future. Father, don't think too much. Among the former mercenary senators that the consul brought here, Xylos is one of the few who isn't married. He's only in his 30s, and he's a senator. I believe that there are many people who want to marry him in Amendora or Tilii, but he's still single. You can imagine that he might not agree to your request." Sostatus reminded Cunegurata, who was getting excited. "Of course I won't go to him directly. I'll let His Excellency the Consul do it. I believe that the Devers will be happy to do it." Cunegurata stroked his beard and smiled proudly. "I've tried asking His Excellency the Consul. He's also very concerned about Helos's marriage. With him as a matchmaker and Diana's beauty, how could Helos not agree? Looks like I'll have to please my sister more from now on, lest she gets upset and asks brother-in-law to place me at the front of the phalanx." Sostatus also joked. This reminded Cunegurata. He quickly said, "Sostatus, don't go out for the next few days. The First Legion you belong to will be heading south to join the war soon. Has the Southern Alliance agreement been signed? Didn't Crotone always oppose it?" Sostatus asked in surprise. With a father who was a senator, he naturally knew more about the politics of the alliance than ordinary citizens. Trine, Surion, and Corunna have all expressed their support. What can Crotone do by opposing it alone? Besides, the current situation is very disadvantageous for them. Even Lysias has come to Thurii. You can see how anxious Crotone is. At this point, Cunegurata was a little excited. Once the alliance is signed and the alliance is established, Dionia will truly become the leader of Greece. I heard that in this new alliance, all the alliances are treated equally, regardless of who's superior or inferior. There's no such thing as a leader. That seems to be the case on the surface, but the strength of the states still determines the weight of their words in this new alliance, especially when it doesn't involve the interests of other states. Cunegurata praised sincerely. His Excellency the Consul is really amazing. By proposing such an alliance, he continuously gained the support of other states, isolated Crotone, and forced them to join. Once the new alliance is established, the old Crotone alliance will be disintegrated, and Dionia will smoothly squeeze into Crotone's original territory, becoming the de facto leader. Isn't this the result of His Excellency making full use of his victory over Crotone? Sostatus's words were a reminder to Cunegurata that he opposed the war beforehand. Cunegurata was silent for a moment. He did not directly answer his son's question, but sighed and said, I never thought that I would be able to see Turiai become the center of Greece while I'm still alive. Son, just like you said before, Turiai will usher in a great development. On the last day of February 498 BC, Dionia, Crotone, Silatina, Corunna, and Trine finally reached an agreement and signed an alliance, establishing the Southern Alliance. Due to Crotone's insistence, the alliance specifically stipulated that when discussing decisions, Dionia and Crotone each had 2 votes, while the other 3 states each had 1 vote. The headquarters of the alliance was located in Silatina. In the beginning, Crotone requested for the headquarters to be located in its territory, but the other states objected. Later, Devers suggested that it be located in Silatina. The other states agreed, because other than Dionia, Silatina was located in the center of the other states, and it was not too strong, so they were more at ease. Normally, the headquarters of the Southern Alliance would be guarded by the states, handling and negotiating matters between the state. The Crotone Alliance was officially disbanded, and the newly signed military alliance between Dionia and Crotone was nullified. Crotone originally had to pay Dionia 500 talent as war reparations, but only 80 talent was paid, and the rest was nullified. This was also one of the reasons why Crotone finally agreed to join the Southern Alliance, but it made Mercies extremely regretful. Up until now, the remaining alliances that Dionia had were the Dionia Alliance, which was an alliance with Dionia as the leader, as Dionia controlled the alliance's foreign relations, meaning it did not allow other states to sign any treaties or agreements with other states, as well as military dominance. The other states had actually become Dionia's vassals. The second was the alliance agreement with Tarentum. Due to Dionia's rapid expansion, the agreement had been amended twice, changing from having Tarentum as the leader to having both parties treat each other as equals and helping each other. Up until now, they only had more trade contacts, but had yet to form a military alliance. Lastly, there was the newly established Southern Alliance. In addition, there was a non-aggression peace agreement with Picassus in the north. Other than the Lochley Alliance, Lygium and a couple of smaller states further south, Dionia and the other states of Greater Greece had formed an alliance to create a peaceful and stable environment for themselves. Of course, at this moment, what Dionia needed to do was to fulfill the alliance agreement and defeat Lochley. The battle this time was different from the past. It would take 3 to 4 days just to reach the battlefield. Relying on the soldiers to carry rations and finish the battle in a few days was no longer feasible. In the previous battle with Crotone, the harassment from Crotone's fleet had already caused Dionia to suffer a lot. This time, the battle with Lochley was even further away, and the food transportation route was even longer. Furthermore, the people of Lochley also controlled the coastline. This would be a huge test for Dionia's logistics. Regarding this, the strategy that the Devers adopted was, first, Mercies would be in charge of quickly building a huge supply team that could carry enough rations for at least 10,000 people for a month. The transport team would set off together with the reinforcements. This would ensure the safety of the supply team and reduce the labor, guards, and unnecessary consumption of rations. Second, to end the battle as soon as possible, the Devers sent out their most elite 1st Legion for this purpose. Preparing rations, buying pack beasts. These preparations for war naturally cost a lot of gold and silver. This time, Mercies was not stingy and bought a lot, as the cost was shared equally by all the allies. When the rooster crowed for the first time in Amendolara, Georges had already turned over and sat up. His wife, Dania, had also opened her eyes. "Sleep a little longer," Georges said gently. "I'm leaving. I can't sleep. I'm going to send you to Turiai." Although Dania was older than Georges, she liked to act coquettishly. This made her feel younger than Georges, and Georges also enjoyed this feeling. But today Georges shook his head. "You're pregnant and you're walking so far. Going back and forth isn't good for the child." "Who said that?" "Help said that pregnant women need to exercise more." Only then will childbirth be smooth, and the child will be healthy. Dania retorted. Geogris did not say anything. He trusted helps quite a bit. He was the disciple of the blessed Devers. Unable to withstand Dania's repeated requests, he could only bring his wife and a male slave to carry his weapons and equipment out of the city. Chapter 247. Geogris was considered a rich man in Amendolan. Actually, it was his wife's. He owned 10 acres of land in Amendolan, planted with olive trees that were more than 10 years old. He also had his own oil press to produce olive oil. At first, they only had a simple carriage, mainly used to transport the finished olive oil to the port of Turin. Since Dania and Geogris got married, she bought a carriage for her husband to ride, considering that Geogris frequently traveled between Turin and Amendolan for military training and handling some military affairs. In fact, Geogris mostly rode a horse. Although there were not many people on the road at this time, all the carriages set off in order. The road from Amendolan to Turin had been built for almost a year. For the sake of safety and convenience, the people had formed some customary rules under the guidance of the Alliance. Now that the Alliance's road department had been established, Heracles Jr. was successfully elected as the head of the department. According to the news, he was going to work on 2 things immediately. One was to submit a bill to the Senate on the maintenance and use of roads in Dionia. He was going to change the road rules among the people into the official road rules used by the Alliance to improve the efficiency of road use. The second was to propose a new design plan for the road and a plan to renovate the old road to the Consul Devers. The coachman drove the 2 horses to run at a constant speed. The wooden wheels, which were bound tightly by iron sheets, spun rapidly on the flat road with clanging sounds. In the bumpy carriage, Geogris listened to his wife's chatter while thinking about some things he heard about the new road department. "I'm going to buy 4 more slaves tomorrow." His wife's words caught his attention. "Don't we have enough slaves at home?" Geogris asked doubtfully. "I haven't seen the 3 acres of land you've been given in Cremissa. I heard that it's all good land. According to the regulations of the Alliance's Ministry of Agriculture, it can only be used to grow wheat. You're busy with the Alliance's military affairs, so you don't have time to work in Cremissa. Of course, I'm going to buy more slaves to take care of the land for us," Dania explained. "It's only 3 acres of land. I don't think we need so many slaves. It'll cost us a lot just to feed them." Geogris was used to being poor, so he still kept a good habit of being thrifty. "My dear, you don't know that the average citizen's family in Dionia has at least 2 or 3 slaves. Everyone understands that only by freeing up the adult males in the family for military training will they be able to make contributions in the war, gain glory, and win more land and benefits. The slave market in Turi port was only built half a year ago, and now it has expanded several times. The price of an ordinary slave has increased from 160 drachma to 200 drachma. If I don't buy a few more now, when I want to buy more in the future, I'm afraid the price will have risen to 300 drachma. Besides, the extra slaves can be sent to Cremissa to speed up the cultivation of our land, dig ditches, and plant wheat seedlings. When the farm work is done, a few of them can go back to the oil press in Amendola to help transport the pots and take care of our olive oil shop at the port. When autumn comes, the busiest season, we need more labor to harvest the wheat, harvest the olives, extract the oil, and grind the flour. When the farm work is done, we have enough slaves. There's no need to hire temporary labor, which is a waste of money and inefficient." Dania explained in detail to Geogris. Geogris didn't know much about these things, but he trusted his wife's ability, so he nodded and said, "If that's the case, we'll do as you say." Dania happily nestled in Geogris's arms. The carriage stopped in front of the south gate of Turii. According to the rules, carriages were not allowed to enter the city, so Geogris and his wife could only get off the carriage and walk, with the slaves carrying his weapons and equipment behind them. Along the way, Many citizens were accompanied by their wives, and even the elderly and children came to see them off. Ever since the example set by Diphus, who often appeared in public with Christoia, and the assimilation of a large number of Lucanians, the tradition in Dionysia of the wives of citizens of the Greek city-states to stay at home and keep to a minimum. Georges! Georges! Georges heard someone calling him and quickly looked back. It was Oliver's. He rushed over with his Persia wife, Mitra. After the four of them greeted each other, Oliver said excitedly, "I heard that you're back in the First Legion again this time. Because Captain Helos has become the governor of Asprustum, and I'm just here to fill in for him temporarily." Georges still maintained his old habit of calling Helos captain in Persia. "What temporary? Devers will definitely let you stay in the First Legion." Olivers curled his lips and smiled mysteriously. "Why?" Georges asked doubtfully. "Because as a captain in the First Legion, it's easier to be the head of the other legions." Olivers leaned over and whispered, "I heard that yesterday Devers proposed a bill to the Senate and it has been passed. In the future, those who serve as a commander for 5 years and perform well will be elected by the senators to become members of the Senate." Before Georges could say anything, Dania, who was listening with her ears pricked up, said excitedly, "That means my husband will become a senator of the Senate in the future." Olivers glanced at her and said with a smile, "Yes, but after me. To become a senator of the Senate, it's not just about fighting, you also need to have the ability to manage. To be like me, not only do I usually serve as the patrol captain of the Turris, but I also hired a private teacher to teach me how to read, count, and speak. Next year, I'm also going to fight for the position of secondary agricultural officer and commercial officer." Dania looked at her silent husband and secretly made up her mind. In the future, she would also urge him to study harder, engage in more local affairs, and not always train recruits in the Ministry of Military Affairs, and so on. Olivers looked at her again, and he found it very interesting. The honest Georges married a wife who looked smart was very suitable. He carefully looked at Dania, and suddenly showed a strange expression on his face. "You're pregnant?" Dania stroked her belly proudly. "It's been 5 months. My wife is also pregnant," Olivers also announced proudly, and Mitra shyly lowered his head. "Among our comrades in this team, I'm afraid only Captain Helos and Matones are not married, right?" Georges suddenly said. "You're really out of touch with the news. Cunagurata likes Helos and wants him to be his son-in-law, and he also wants the Devers to be the matchmaker. The Devers have already agreed, and with the Devers, that blockhead Helos can't refuse. As for Matones, didn't you notice that he was a little strange when we left Cremissa?" Olivers smiled mischievously. "I asked my men to secretly ask around in his brigade, and it turns out that this big guy has a crush on a girl in Cremissa." "Ah, really?" Georges looked surprised. "Of course it's true. But don't ask him, or else he'll beat you up and drag me into it," Olivers reminded. According to the alliance agreement, Dionia not only wanted to defeat Rockley as soon as possible, but it was also a chance to display the might of the alliance in the southern Italian city-states to increase its influence in this region. Therefore, not only did Dionia send out the most elite First Legion, but they could also transfer experienced soldiers from other legions to fill in the gaps of the First Legion due to injuries and illnesses. Even the personnel responsible for the transportation of the supplies were made up of more than 1,000 mercenaries led by Xanthoparis. This not only ensured the safety of the supplies, but it also served as a powerful supplement for the combat troop. Of course, Divers, Felicius, and the others also had their own selfish motive. They hoped that these former comrades could make new contributions and become preparatory citizens of Dionia as soon as possible. The First Legion consisted of more than 7,000 people, the supply escort team consisted of 1,500 people, a total of nearly 9,000 people, and countless supply wagons made up of pack beasts. After being inspected by Divers and the Senate in the Victory Square, this huge army set off towards the south in a grandiose manner. The first time Rockley heard of the Dionia alliance, it wasn't called that back then, was during the First Crotone War. The Crotone army was defeated and captured by the much smaller Amandalora army. The people of Rockley were pleasantly surprised and excited. They were happy to see another city-state to the north of Crotone that could cause trouble for the Crotone. Following the principle of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Rockley sent messengers to contact Amandalora, hoping to form an alliance to deal with Crotone together. In the end, Amandalora did not respond. Instead, they signed a truce with the Crotone and returned the thousands of Crotone soldiers to Crotone half a year later. During the negotiations, Rockley even became a bargaining chip for Amandalora to threaten Crotone and reach a truce. As a result, the people of Rockley began to resent Amandalora. Chapter 248. When the Locrians heard the news, they were shocked and in awe. For the past few decades, Rockley had never won a single victory against Crotone. On the other hand, the newly formed Dionia alliance was able to defeat Crotone twice in a row. Of course, to Rockley, the most important thing was that Crotone had suffered heavy losses and was in a tough battle with Dionia. This was the perfect opportunity. Rockley could not wait for news from the envoy, Metrophenes, and began to plan an attack on the Crotone alliance. In order to defeat their mortal enemy in one fell swoop, they mobilized the alliance for war. At the same time, the brother of Dionysius's wife, the chief general of Rockley, Demodorus, sent a request for help from Syracuse. At this time, Syracuse had already started the war against Carthage. The powerful army was taking down towns after towns. Only the navy had not encountered the enemy yet. Other than some warships escorting the army along the coastline, the rest were on standby in Syracuse's port. On one hand, it was out of friendship with Rockley, but on the other hand, it was to prepare for the future. Dionysius sent more than 23 oared warships to aid the Locrians. With Syracuse as his backing, Rockley could not wait to start the war. Unexpectedly, Dionia and Crotone came to an armistice. Not only did they sign a defensive alliance treaty, but they also released all the captives. Metrophenes felt that he had been fooled and returned to his country in anger. The Locrians were furious. Dionia had repeatedly ignored Rockley's good intentions, intentionally or unintentionally obstructing Rockley's plans. It was only because they had to focus on dealing with their mortal enemy, Crotone, that they did not want to complicate matters. They temporarily swallowed their anger and would deal with them in the future. At the same time, Rockley began to be wary of Dionia. Although they suffered a small setback in the battle with Crotone, the naval battle was won by Syracuse's reinforcements. Without the protection of the navy, Crotone's army did not have enough manpower. The Locrians mobilized their forces back and forth, forcing them into a passive position. Just as Rockley saw hope for victory, news came. The envoy of the Crotone alliance had gathered in Thurii and requested reinforcements from Dionia. What the Rockarians feared the most had happened. Due to the unsatisfactory performance of Metamorpho Phoenix, they immediately sent Panticipaes, who was the most eloquent of them all. However, not only did his arrival fail to change Dionia's mind, but it also hastened the establishment of the Southern Alliance. Before Panticipaes left Thurii, he angrily told the senators of the Dionia Senate, "Apollo can testify that we, the people of Locri, have always respected Dionia, but every time we offered an olive branch, we were met with malicious deceit and mockery from Dionia. From today onwards, Rockley and Dionia were enemies. The next time we come, there will be no more messengers of peace, but the wrath of Ares and a powerful army." The faces of the senators changed slightly. Devers calmly said, "Before the Crotone alliance started the war, their envoy stood where you are now and said something similar. What about now?" Although Devers appeared relaxed, he knew that the people of Locri were now dominating the sea. After Dionia declared war, It was likely that the Crotone fleet would repeat what they did to Dionia. Therefore, he reassembled Led's cavalry and had them patrol along the coastline. At the same time, he reactivated the measures that Felicius had taken to deal with the Crotone fleet's surprise attack. The Senate also suspended the immigration of Asprostum and Cremissa. However, a few days passed and nothing happened. The First Legion arrived at the city of Asprostum. More than 1,000 garrison soldiers joined the army, increasing the number of people participating in the battle to more than 10,000. 5 days later, the army arrived at the city of Carunia. The journey was smooth and there were no accidents. The reason why they arrived 2 days longer than the original plan was that they did not anticipate the harsh conditions of the roads in the south of Great Greece, and when they passed by Silatina, they were warmly welcomed by the people there. After the reinforcements of Dionia arrived on the battlefield, the people of Carunia rejoiced. They were ready to wait for the Dionia army to rest and immediately launch an attack on Rockley's camp in the south of the city. However, they did not expect that before this plan could be implemented, Rockley sent an envoy for peace talks. 100 years ago, Crotone defeated Gobares and quickly became the strongest nation in Great Greece. It had the ambition to dominate the south and launched many attacks to the south. The most serious time, under its attack, Rockley and the surrounding city-states' armies were repeatedly defeated. In the end, in order to avoid repeating the mistakes of Gobares, Rockley and Ligium joined forces and launched a counterattack when Crotone was careless, heavily damaging the Crotone army. Crotone's strength was greatly damaged, and it was unable to attack the south for a while. In order to prevent Crotone from recovering its strength, Rockley and Ligium began a long-term counterattack against Crotone's alliance. They even joined forces with the indigenous Briti people in the north of Crotone's alliance. For decades, Crotone had been trapped by the Briti people in the north, and the threat of Rockley and Ligium in the south. They had always been tired of dealing with them, and could never regain their former glory. Therefore, when Athens wanted to build the city of Thurii on the Gobares plain, it could only make concessions and sign an agreement. However, the cooperation between Rockley and Ligium was not close. Once the threat of Crotone weakened, the conflict between the two began to show. The biggest conflict was that both city-states were coastal cities, and they were very close to each other, so the competition for port trade was inevitable. Because Ligium controlled half of the Strait of Messina, it had the upper hand in sea trade, while Rockley opened up trade routes from Rockley to Medmar and Hyhernion, both cities on the west coast of Greece, so that Greek merchants could reach the west coast through land trade without paying high tariffs through the Strait of Messina. Therefore, they seized a lot of profits from Ligium as a transit port for trade in the western Mediterranean. These conflicts accumulated and finally erupted a few years ago. Dionysius, who had just become the general of Syracuse, wanted to remarry because his wife was killed by the angry people in the previous power struggle. At the same time, this was also a kind of political marriage to stabilize his power. Therefore, after he married the daughter of a famous noble in Syracuse who supported him, he wanted to marry another woman. His eyes were set on Ligium, which was only one strait away from Sicily. On one hand, Ligium's geographical location was too important, and on the other hand, there was a woman in Ligium who was famous. However, the people of Ligium refused. They were wary of Dionysius, who had become the tyrant of Syracuse. They did not forget that a few decades ago, when the tyrant of Syracuse, Chiron, was in power, they coveted Ligium, which forced Ligium to form an alliance with Carthage to protect itself. Dionysius had to propose to the people of Rockley, and Rockley agreed. This caused the alliance between Rockley and Ligium to completely break down. As for why Dionysius did not look for Crotone and Crotone, this was because during the War of Peloponnesus, Crotone and Thurii were on the side of Athens. They even provided assistance when Athens' army attacked Syracuse. Tarentum was a substate of Sparta and had always been close to Sparta. It did not mean much to Dionysius. The departure of Ligyme made it difficult for Rockley to cause trouble for Crotone. It was not until Dionia severely injured Crotone twice that he rekindled his hope. When Rockley mobilized for war, he also sent messengers to the people of Brutty. The people of Brutty, who had always been positive about Rockley's invitations, rejected Rockley's request this time. The reason they gave was that the people of Brutty attacked Treen alone last year and suffered heavy losses, so they needed to rest and reorganize. However, the messengers of Rockley found that the Brutty tribe near Cosenza seemed to be making some kind of change. With the help of the navy of Syracuse, the people of Rockley attacked the people of Crotone. Reality proved that even though Crotone's strength was greatly damaged, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Although Rockley had the upper hand, he could not win quickly. Now that Dionia had joined the war, the situation had taken a turn for the worse for Rockley. After the diplomatic failure with Dionia, the people of Rockley immediately went to the players of Syracuse. Dionysius received the messengers of Rockley in the newly occupied city of Selinus. After listening to the messenger's request, Dionysius frowned. He thought for a moment and said directly, "The war between Syracuse and Carthage is at a critical moment. I have no reinforcements to send. Sue for peace. Once I've conquered Sicily, I'll make Locke pay for this." The messengers returned to Rockley helplessly. The people of Rockley were not fools. Without reinforcements, they had no chance of winning. Suing for peace was the only way out. In the decades of entanglement with Crotone, it was common for them to stop and stop. Lockley was already used to it. He would not insist on a hopeless battle for the sake of glory. Therefore, the First Legion of Dionia came excitedly, but in the end there was not a single battle. They were passively playing the role of mediator. Fortunately, the Southern Alliance had a good impression of the Dionysian army that appeared in central southern Italy for the first time, especially the people of Kyrenia. They were surprised to find that the soldiers of Dionia, who had set up camp outside Kyrenia city, had been quietly staying in the camp during the negotiation. They did not disturb the people at all. In this regard, they did even better than the people of Crotone, who had been allies of Kyrenia for decades. Chapter 249. Cypros gave a detailed and comprehensive review of the Dionysian army at the Trine Council. What impressed me was that the Dionia citizen soldiers had strong discipline and obedience to orders, which was different from the armies of the other allies I had seen, including our own. It was said that the Dionia alliance had formulated a military law to restrain the behavior of the soldiers, and there were strict regulations on military training, marching, camping, and other aspects. There was also a military judge in the army to supervise the implementation of the law. The soldiers did not resist when they violated the military law, but felt ashamed. I learned from the Dionia citizen soldiers that they had to train once every 5 days during the slack season. This was already a number that surprised us Trine people, and they seemed to enjoy the training and did not complain at all about the waste of the farmland because of the training. Therefore, they could skillfully use the shields, spears, bows, and javelins in their hands, and could maintain a complete formation during the march. They were not only serious in building the camp, but also had a clear division of labor and high efficiency. Therefore, they could build a surprisingly well-guarded camp in a short time. In addition, there was another obvious difference between the Dionysian army and the other city-states. Their commanders and officers of all levels were not appointed at the last minute after the war, but had always held positions in the army. Therefore, they not only had rich combat experience, but were also familiar with every soldier under their command. Therefore, when they marched and built the camp, they could command the soldiers very smoothly, and they cooperated well with each other. The superiors and subordinates had clear responsibilities, and when carrying out orders, they rarely shirked responsibility or acted on their own. What surprised me even more was that these soldiers were not afraid of fighting, but eager to fight. This reminded me of the Sparta in Greece. Although I had not seen them in battle, The fact that they defeated Crotone despite being outnumbered was enough to prove the fighting power of the Dionysian army. In short, in my eyes, the Dionysian army was like a well-made, well-operated, and terrible weapon of war. After listening to Cypros, the Trine Council made a decision. Without affecting their own interests, they would give Dionia as much support as possible in the Southern Alliance. After a few days of negotiations, a peace agreement was finally reached. Rockley would compensate Corunna, Trine, Silatina, and Crotone with a certain amount of gold and silver, and both sides would agree to a truce. Just as peace was restored in southern Italy, a war broke out in the Lucaria region in the northwest of Dionia in early March. The army of Potentia besieged and attacked the Grimentum for more than 10 days. Picassus's Nanette arrived with his army and attacked the rear of Potentia's army. Meanwhile, Sinsing saw the arrival of reinforcements from the top of the city wall and promptly led his army to attack. Potentia was caught in a pincer attack and quickly retreated. Picassus and the Grimentum chased after them. The Potentia people lost their camp and fled in panic. Picassus and the Grimentum people broke into the Potentia camp one after the other. When they saw the herds of cattle and sheep, the piles of food, and the many women and slaves of other tribes that Potentia had captured along the way, they were no longer in the mood to chase after the enemy. Both sides began to fight over the goods and women in the camp. The Grimentum people believed that they had defeated the Potentia army, so the spoils of war should belong to them. On the other hand, the Grimentum people believed that most of the goods were looted by Potentia from the tribes that belonged to the Grimentum outside the city, so they should be returned to the Grimentum. The quarrels and conflicts at the beginning quickly turned into fights, especially between the Grimentum people, who originally had a higher status in the Lucania alliance. During this period of time, not only were many of their leaders killed and under the control of Picassus's people, but Picassus's people also looked down on them and ordered them around. This made them feel extremely disappointed and humiliated. Coupled with the fact that the pixie warriors who followed Sinsing were tyrannical in the Grimentum city, the accumulated resentment in their hearts finally erupted once it was provoked. The Grimentum people gathered and madly attacked the pixie people in the camp. Both sides began to fight to the death, and the situation was completely out of control. Sinsing could not stop them at all. Finally, when he made up his mind to destroy these capricious Grimentum people, the leader of Potentia, Borit, led some of the reorganized soldiers back. The Picassus people, who were fighting with the Grimentum people in the camp, were attacked from all sides and finally suffered a crushing defeat. Sinsing and his son took the remaining soldiers and did not even dare to return to the Grimentum city. They directly fled into the mountains, and after a few turns, they finally escaped back to Picassus. In the end, the Potentia people occupied the Grimentum city. At the same time, after 2 months of siege and bitter battles, Tarentum finally captured the small city of Brindisi, which was located to the east of Tarentum and was close to the Adriatic Sea. This was a major breakthrough in the expansion of Tarentum's territory since its establishment. The people dedicated their praise to the leading generals, Diomyras and Archita. Archita, however, was not happy. This time, the attack on the Masapi people was fully supported by the city-state. Although the original plan discussed by the council was realized, the land route between Tarentum and the Adriatic Sea was opened, and the communication between the Masapi people and the north was cut off, sealing them in the peninsula. The price paid was also very high. The casualties of the Tarentum militia were as high as 4,000 people. The Masapi people were famous for their fierceness in southern Italy. During the Greek colonial era hundreds of years ago, many Greek city-states were established in southern Italy, but on this heel of the peninsula, there was always only one Tarentum. While other colonial city-states were attacking and assimilating the nearby indigenous people to expand their territory, the Tarentum people, who were in a unique position, were lamenting their misfortune. Their neighbors to the east, the Masapi people, were not only fierce and numerous, but also not completely barbaric indigenous people. According to their own claims, they were Illyrians from northern Greece near the Adriatic Sea. They had cultural traditions similar to the Greeks. The Greeks never recognized them and still regarded them as barbarians, which made Tarentum unable to advance inland for hundreds of years. Especially decades ago, Tarentum supported its mother state, Sparta, in the War of Peloponnesus, which aroused hostility from Athens. So Athens supported the Messapi people to fight against Tarentum. Since then, the Messapi attacks on Tarentum began to increase, causing the people to suffer. This time, if it weren't for the stimulation of the rapid rise of Dionia, the Senate of Tarentum might not have made up its mind to attack the Messapi people. However, Archita knew that although the city-state had won temporarily, the Messapi people would never give up. The war with them would probably continue for a long time. The wailing of the wounded soldiers outside the city and the triumphant cries of the crows pecking at the corpses were intertwined, making one's heart tremble. Archita stood on the low wall of Brindisi, staring blankly at the western horizon dyed scarlet by the setting sun. His heart was filled with worry for the future. In April, Syracuse's army continued to advance westward. Eryx, Halucia, and other city-states opened their cities and surrendered. Silinsta, the only one who remained loyal to Carthage, was besieged. In mid-April, Dionysius's army arrived at the westernmost point of Sicily, facing the island city in the bay, which was also Carthage's important base in Sicily, Moscha. Moscha destroyed the causeway connecting the land and prepared to defend by sea. Dionysius commanded the army to rebuild the causeway. At the same time, he led the army to conquer nearby areas. However, Silinsta repelled Syracuse's attack, forcing Syracuse to continue to besiege it. In May, the causeway was completed, and Dionysius led the army back to prepare to attack Moscha. At this time, Carthage was also preparing to send troops to rescue this precarious sea city. They first adopted the strategy of besieging Way to rescue Zhao. They sent warships to Syracuse, broke into the port, and destroyed the port ships in an attempt to lure Dionysius back to support them. However, Dionysius was unmoved. The Carthaginian general, Himilco, had no choice but to lead his army to rescue Moscha. A large number of Carthaginian warships went around the Cape of Palermo and sailed into the bay aggressively, attempting to destroy the Syracuse warships that were on the beach. Dionysius had been waiting for a long time. He set up dozens of new weapons on the beach of this circular peninsula, Ballisti. With an order, round stones the size of bowls flew out and smashed into the Carthage warships in the bay. Devers carefully looked at the silver-white coin in his hand. It weighed 4 grams and was very close to a standard circle. On one side was the head of Hades with a thick beard and long hair, with the letters, Dionia Alliance, engraved below. On the other side was a leafy poplar, Pluto's holy tree, with the letters, 95 Olympia Games, 3rd year, engraved below. The images on both sides were in the middle. The engravings were subtle, the bumps were obvious, and the letters were clear. Devers tossed the coin up and caught it. He weighed it in his hand and asked, "How much silver does it contain?" Tritodemus stepped forward and said, "According to your proposal and through the Senate's coin bill, we have produced a silver drachma with a purity of more than 95%, which is equivalent to the purity of the owl in Athens, the famous silver Laurion coin in Greece. But," Tritodemus said worriedly, "we don't have a large silver mine like Athens, and the treasury's income is mainly from trade and taxes. Issuing such a high-purity silver coin will not be a small loss." Chapter 250. The currency used for trade in the Mediterranean in this era was gold and silver. The people of Persia mainly used gold coins, while the Greek city-states did not have that many gold mines, so they mainly used silver coins. Since each city-state had the right to mint their own silver coins, the currency market in the entire Mediterranean Sea was quite chaotic. The weight and silver purity of the coins issued by different city-states were not uniform, which brought difficulties to trade. That was why the currency exchange was born. When it came to exchange, Tritodemus complained in his heart. In the Greek city-states, exchange business was mainly handled by bank. The more prosperous the city-state was, the more developed the banking industry was. However, although there were many banks in the various cities of Dionia, they all belonged to one person, Chrystoia, the wife of the consul Devers of Dionia. Of course, this was not the result of any administrative interference by the Devers. Since its establishment, the Chrystoia Bank had adopted an average loan yield that was far lower than the 15% interest rate of the Greek city-states at that time, that is, 5%. Although the Chrystoia Bank broke the tacit rules of the banking industry in the Greek city-states, Amendolara and Turin at that time were in dire straits. No rich merchants came out to stop them. On the contrary, because of its low-interest loans, countless families and small workshops were supported, and they got out of the initial predicament. Thus, the Chrystoia Bank gained a reputation. Today's trade in Dionia was not comparable to the past. Some merchants had the idea of opening banks, and they were forced to implement low-interest loans in the Union. However, the Chrystoia Bank had made its brand deeply rooted in the hearts of the people of Dionia. People trusted and appreciated it, so there was often a long queue in front of the Chrystoia Bank, while there were few customers in other banks. Normal competition was not possible, and it was even more impossible to play other tricks. Don't forget that the Chrystoia Bank was backed by the only consul Devers of Dionia. Therefore, since it was not profitable to open a bank in Dionia, merchants had to invest in other industries. With the expansion of the Union of Dionia, there were more profitable industries, and the competition became fierce, but there was always only one bank. Tritodemus looked at the man in front of him. At such a young age, he was already the most powerful man in Dionia, and he had a smart and beautiful wife, who made a lot of money for him. How enviable! The Devers did not notice Tritodemus's strange gaze. He focused all his attention on the coins. He picked up 2 silver coins and looked at them carefully. They were almost the same. He asked with concern, "What do you think about the style and pattern of this Dionia silver coin compared to the Athens silver coin?" The owl of Athens was not only of high silver purity, but also had exquisite patterns. Even after the Dionia of Athens was disbanded and could not to other city-state to use, the Dionia-Athens alliance. The merchants and people of the Dionia to exchange for the Lie coins. Into their own. Of Athens de Dionia coins, and kept. Therefore, the Lie coins of Athens de Dionia coins were the most widely circulated and used hard currency in the Greek city-state. I've repeatedly compared more than a dozen Lie coins minted in different years with the other members of the coinage committee. We all agree that our Dionia coins are not inferior to the Lie coins in terms of purity and engraving. Tritodemus picked up the silver coin and rubbed the raised ring on the edge. He said excitedly, "Consul Devers, your suggestion was wonderful. We did not use the traditional method of making complicated and rough serrations. Instead, we used a simple inlay. Not only did it improve efficiency, but it also did not wear out easily. Everyone thought that it was as heavy and dignified as the pillars of a temple. I believe that once the Dionia coins are released, they will soon be loved by the people," Tritodemus said excitedly. The Devers looked calm. The previous design was a suggestion he made based on the characteristics of ancient coins in China. There was nothing to be proud of. He was more concerned about whether the Dionia coins could circulate quickly and become the main currency used by the southern Italian city-state. This was not only to expand the influence of Dionia, but also to dominate the currency distribution rights of Greece and control the economy and trade of the southern city-states. Just like in Athens, even after the Peloponnesus War, trade shrank, financial difficulties, and the silver ore produced by the Lie silver mine did not reduce the purity of the owl coins. The people of Athens de Dionia's insistence on the credibility of the city-state's currency was rewarded. Just a few years after the end of the war, there were more and more foreign merchants coming to the port of Airhofs. Now, the trade in Athens was gradually returning to its former prosperity. Sir Tritodemus, in the past few months, your Mint Committee has put in a lot of effort for this small silver coin. Thank you for your hard work. I believe that when it is successfully released and the day the people of Greece accept it, your name will be left in the Temple of the Wise. Hearing the Devers' praise, Tritodemus suddenly became excited. As the Temple of Hades was about to be built, some special architectural structures in the temple were also circulated among the people. For example, there were 2 side halls in the temple. One was called the Hall of Valhalla, dedicated to the warriors who sacrificed themselves to protect the safety of the Alliance. The other was called the Temple of the Wise, where the names of the citizens who made outstanding contributions to the Alliance would be engraved in the temple for people to worship. It was said that this was the design of the Devers. As a citizen of the Alliance, especially the elders, who did not want to leave their names in history, it was inevitable that Tritodemus could not control his emotions and was overjoyed. At this moment, a dissatisfied voice sounded, "Since it's all the credit of the Mint Committee, it has nothing to do with our Mathematical Research Institute. Next, if you want to make the medal of primitive citizens of Amendarara and other things, don't look for us again." Tritodemus looked back and saw Martocores. He quickly said to the Devers, "It's all thanks to the Mathematical Research Institute of Martocores and Mentodicus that we can make such a beautiful coin. If it weren't for their design of the coin mold, and that hydraulic power, it's the hydraulic press." Martocores added impatiently. Tritodemus coughed awkwardly and said, "It's because they designed these wonderful tools that we can make such beautiful coins. Not to mention that it's better than the coins designed by Pythagoras for Metapontum, it's even comparable to the famous coins of Athens in Greece. It's not all our credit." Mentodicus, who had always been steady, said humbly, "If it weren't for your design of the water wheel that inspired us, Master Devers, we wouldn't have thought of using hydraulic power instead of manpower. Unfortunately, the force generated by the water flow of the Kaladi River is not strong enough to fully drive the large hydraulic hammer that you mentioned last time that can continuously hammer large iron castings." "Then let's go to the dam," the Devers blurted out. "Dam?" Martocores's eyes lit up. "We'll talk about this later." Currently, there was construction everywhere in Dionia. There was the resettlement of the immigrants of Asprustum and Cremissa, the construction of the Temple of Hades, the construction of roads, the transformation of the Cremissa swamp, the construction of the Turii hot springs. There was no more labor to build the more demanding and complex design of the dam. So, the Devers changed the topic and said to Tritodemus, "Martocores and the others won't compete with you for this credit, because they are destined to become famous mathematicians in the future. There will definitely be statues of them in the Temple of the Sage." Faced with such high praise, Martocores was a little embarrassed. He rubbed his head and laughed. Mentodicus, who was beside him, was more composed, but he could not hide the excitement on his face. After sending off Tritodemus, only Martocores and Mentodicus were left in the living room. Now, they were no longer ordinary disciples of the Pythagorean school of thought. As early as last year, because of their achievements in the manufacture of the water wheel and the free popularization of mathematics among the people, the Devers proposed the introduction of Foreign Scholars Bill in the Senate. It was passed together with the Doctor's Bill and the Teacher's Bill. They were known as the 3 major bills of Dionia to transform the quality of citizens. As time went on, the cultural center of the Mediterranean gradually moved westward, but this is a story to be told later, making them official citizens of Dionia. Although the 2 of them studied mathematics in Tarentum, they were not citizens of Tarentum. Instead, they were from the city of Sicily, Leontini. It was only because they loved mathematics since childhood and admired Pythagoras that they stayed in Tarentum for a long time. Because their homeland was occupied by Syracuse, they actually became homeless. This was the main reason why the Pythagorean school of thought sent them to Amendalar, because they were insignificant to the school. However, in the Dionia Union, their status had changed dramatically. Not only did they have land and a house, but they were also respected. The Devers even privately funded the construction of a mathematics research institute for them. They provided assistants, slaves, and various materials and funds for free, so that they would not be disturbed by the outside world and could devote themselves to theoretical research and practical application of mathematics. Chapter 251. What have the two of you been researching recently? Devers asked with a smile. Other than helping the Senate's Mint Committee design molds and tools for silver coins, we've been mainly researching pulleys, Mentodicus said truthfully. Pulleys? Devers's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. Last year, when you defeated Crotone and annexed Turiae, didn't Archita come to Amendalara? Matacoris said casually. Devers didn't mind and nodded. He saw our newly built water wheel and was very interested in it. So, he discussed the principle of its operation with us. At the same time, he also mentioned that he had recently become interested in mathematical mechanics and began to study the application of pulleys. Matacoris said with some embarrassment. So, He glanced at Mentodicus. We began to study pulleys, Devers understood. Although Archita was an important figure of the Pythagorean school of thought and a mathematical genius, the two in front of him were just ordinary disciples. But in terms of academics, they were not inferior to anyone, especially Matacoris. He had exuberant energy, strong curiosity, and a desire to explore. Now that he was living a good life, he put all his energy into research and wanted to compete with Archita in academic. How's the research going? Devers softly interrupted Matacoris's stammering words. Although he had returned a lot of science knowledge to his teacher in his previous life, it was not to the point where he didn't even know what a pulley was. It was just basic physics knowledge in junior high school. We've already created the mathematical formula for the reason why pulleys can save effort, and we've verified its correctness many times. Of course, using the numerical symbols you've invented has saved us a lot of time and energy. Now we're further experimenting with multiple pulley combinations to perfect its theory. By then, this discovery will change the entire Mediterranean world. Can you imagine a person using a pulley to pull a boulder more than 10 meters high by himself? Can you imagine a person using a pulley to pull a small boat by himself? Matacoris's eyes lit up when he talked about mathematics, and he danced with joy. Devers wasn't as surprised as they expected. Instead, he smiled and said, I believe your research and invention will bring great convenience to the lives of the people of the Alliance. The two looked at each other, a little dejected. As Hades's favored ones, Devers seemed to have long seen the future development of mathematical research. Every time they stood in front of him, they never had the superiority of a scholar. Matacoris could only complain. If you hadn't asked us to help them mint coins, our research would have progressed faster. Isn't minting coins just to prove your ability to the Pythagorean school? Devers smiled. Back then, when he handed over the task of minting coins to Tritodmos, he did not consider the two disciples of the Pythagorean school of thought. However, his high request put Tritodmos in a difficult position. In the end, it was Tritodmos who took the initiative to look for Devers and asked for Matiris' help. After Pythagoras was banished by the Crotone a few decades ago, he stayed in Metapontum and designed an exquisite coin mold for Metapontum, causing the coins of this unknown Greek city-state to be extremely popular. That was why Devers thought of asking Matiris and the other two disciples of the Pythagorean school of thought for help. Compared to Pythagoras's era, the Academy's research on the design of coin molds is much more complete, so, Mentodicus said humbly. But they don't have a hydraulic press, so our silver coins are indeed better than theirs. Martyris scoffed. But they don't have a hydraulic press, so our silver coins are indeed better than theirs. After spending so much time together, Devers had a basic understanding of the two young men in front of him. Back then, most of the people of the Pythagorean school were unwilling to come to the remote town of Amyndolara, so they were forced to send these two unknown foreign disciples. This was a huge blow to the sensitive Leontini. Under Devers's long-term guidance, the two, who used to be lowly in the school, had gradually deviated from and disagreed with some of the school's ideals. They wanted to compete with their former teachers and classmates. Devers smiled and took out a piece of papyrus. I have a blueprint here. It shows a machine that involves the use of pulleys. I wonder if you can make it? Let me see. As soon as Devers's voice fell, Matacories snatched it from Devers's hands. Mentodicus moved closer and looked at the blueprint. What is this machine called? The people of Syracuse call it a ballista. It is said that it can shoot a stone weighing more than 10 kilograms a few hundred meters away. 10 days ago, Syracuse used it to repel Carthage's reinforcements, Devers said calmly, but his heart was not calm. When Aristides reported to Devers about the naval battle of Moria, he was very surprised. Dionia's catapults were still in the trial stage, but Syracuse's ballista and bow had appeared in large quantities in Moria and successfully sank many Carthage warships. Its power and accuracy were not comparable to Dionia's crude catapult. This showed the gap in military engineering technology between Syracuse and Dionia. This made Devers feel pressured. He immediately ordered Aristides to obtain the blueprint of Syracuse's ballista at all costs. Aristides, who hated Syracuse, could not ask for more. After paying a huge price, he finally obtained the rough blueprint of Syracuse's ballista. Hearing the name, Syracuse, the two scholars who had also lost their motherland looked at it even more seriously. They wished they could crawl into the blueprint. Mentodicus Els. At this time, Devers asked, Last time, I told you about attracting and recruiting more of your classmates to Dionia to expand the scale of the research institute and further promote the research of mathematical theory and application. How is the progress? Mentodicus reluctantly moved his eyes away from the blueprint and said helplessly, Sir Consul, since the School of Mathematics condemned us for violating the rules and teaching in public, many students have cut off correspondence with me. Only a few foreign students who I have a good relationship with are willing to come to Dionia after listening to my introduction of the good environment in Dionia. As long as they are willing to come, Dionia will fulfill its promise. In addition, if they have any other needs, you can tell me directly. I will try my best to satisfy them. Dionia will create the best environment and conditions for you to study, discuss, and research. Even though you have fewer people, I believe that you will be able to produce results that are no less fruitful than those in Tarentum. Devers showed their full support for the Mathematics Research Institute without reservation. Mentodicus was grateful, but at the same time, it also aroused his ambition. He said solemnly, We will not let you down. About the matter of sending teachers to the newly built school to teach, how is your discussion going? Devers asked again. Initially, we were a little hesitant because of the lack of manpower. Now that some new students are coming, after discussing it with Matacories, we think that you are right. Teaching at the school can help us sort out the mathematical theories we have mastered and consolidate our basic knowledge. At the same time, it can also expand the influence of the Research Institute. Maybe we can get new inspiration from the exchange with the students. We are very willing to send people, but we have a request. What is it? If we find a student in the school who is talented in mathematics, we hope that he can be specially trained to join the Research Institute in the future, Mentodicus said carefully. Mentodicus said carefully, because this was his and Matacories' selfishness. Since they had fallen out with the Pythagorean school of Tarentum, they also wanted to develop their own academic group to compete with the Pythagorean school. Of course, that's not a problem, but you have to ask for the consent of the students. Devers agreed without hesitation. In fact, he was very happy to see this. Matacories and Mentodicus could consider the problem from the perspective of their own interests, which showed that they were getting farther and farther away from the Pythagorean school of Tarentum, both emotionally and in action. In addition, I am also planning to let the engineers in the various legions come to the Mathematics Research Institute to be your assistant. This will not only solve the problem of your lack of manpower, but it will also allow you to closely combine theory and practical application. Of course, the Research Institute welcomes their help. Mentodicus was better at dealing with things than Matacories. He said tactfully, "But we don't have enough money to pay them,